Reincarnated with a weak body with no magic ability. RMC unlocks an OP system. Using this, he can learn hundreds of magic books in just seconds, and continues on his path to become the most OP Sigma Mage. If you like the intro, then help us get 669 likes. And let's begin. Kyle Salterian appears in the virtual reality game called Fantasy Defense. He is the youngest son of the prestigious swordsman family, the Salterian Marquis, and is one of the characters involved in significant early game events. However, during an event involving the main character, he gets badly beaten and ends up dying at the hands of a minion summoned by a villain. Despite being just a minion, it defeats Kyle Salterian with a single strike. This makes Kyle Salterian nothing more than an extra, and that extra happens to be our protagonist. Staring into the mirror, Kyle Salterian pinches his cheek and yells out in pain. Since he can feel pain, Kyle Salterian is now sure that this isn't a dream, and everything is real. He is puzzled as to how this could be possible since, when he was on Earth, he was ranked number 1 in this game, but now he's possessed a worthless character. This game, Fantasy Defense, is a virtual reality game that will become a huge hit worldwide in 2030. It had such a devilish difficulty level that no one cleared it for 10 years, which made it extremely popular among players. Based on how players completed quests, they earned points in the global rankings, with rare quests and items increasing their score. For 10 years, the protagonist immersed himself in this game, mastering everything from rare magic circles to legendary crafting combinations. With an overwhelming score, he was a living legend in this game. Yes, the protagonist's real name is Lee Hyunwoo on Earth. However, now that Lee Hyunwoo has possessed such a weak character, he wonders how he will clear and survive the game now. Besides, Lee Hyunwoo has played this game so much that he knows the fate of the character he's possessed. The final goal in Fantasy Defense is to stop the forces of darkness, and the one who summoned them is the second son of the Salterian family, Adolf. In an attempt to usurp the head of the Salterian family, Adolf seeks the power of darkness to start a rebellion. In the end, the Salterian territory becomes a base for the dark forces, who have long coveted human lands. Amidst the chaos, the incompetent and powerless Kyle Salterian meets his cruel end. Now, knowing what awaits him, Lee Hyunwoo thinks about leaving the territory before the rebellion starts. However, there's an even bigger problem. Kyle Salterian also has a disease. The disease is called Hermamu. Hermamu is a condition where the mana channels inside the body are blocked, and in this game, mana is the source of both aura and magic, essential for survival. Those with blocked mana channels, like Hermamu patients, can't absorb the necessary nutrients for life and growth, and they die before reaching 20. The only cure for Hermamu is to absorb mana from nature into one's body, but with blocked channels, this is impossible. In other words, being diagnosed with Hermamu is almost like receiving a death sentence, and Kyle Salterian, diagnosed at a young age, fell into despair. He feared death, felt anxiety about the time he had left, and was frustrated by his inability to fight back. His fear consumed him, and eventually, he became twisted. Before long, Kyle Salterian turned into a disgrace to the family. His father constantly scolded Kyle Salterian and angrily ordered him to stay inside his room. In the end, his father confined Kyle Salterian to an annex. Isolated and alone, Kyle Salterian grew even angrier, believing everyone looked down on him. In his anger, he would throw furniture around the room. Frustrated beyond belief, he cursed his family, wishing for their deaths. Remembering all of these events, Lee Hyunwoo acknowledges that Kyle Salterian, the character he's possessed, is beyond saving. Lee Hyunwoo feels that Kyle Salterian is too rotten for anyone to sympathize with his illness. Still, Lee Hyunwoo recounts the facts. He's possessed Kyle Salterian, the youngest son of the Marquis, and the family is doomed. Kyle Salterian has no talent in swordsmanship or magic, a short life expectancy, a terrible personality, a horrible reputation, and was confined by his own father. Lee Hyunwoo admits he's truly doomed, knowing he will die in the end, no matter what he does. Seeing no hope, he shouts, asking what he can possibly do to survive with such terrible stats, and why he wasn't given a cheat ability after reincarnating. He's aware that when someone reincarnates, they usually get a status window. At that moment, a bright light fills the room, causing Lee Hyunwoo to stop shouting and stare at the unusual phenomenon in awe. Seeing small mana spheres floating before him, Lee Hyunwoo reaches out his hand to touch one, wondering what it is. The moment he touches the mana, it shines even brighter and releases some sort of energy into the surroundings. Lee Hyunwoo grows more confused, unsure of what is happening. Suddenly, the system appears, notifying Lee Hyunwoo that he's awakened and has been granted 2 new talents. The status window unlocks, and Lee Hyunwoo can now use Insight, which will automatically activate. Seeing the system, or rather the status window, Lee Hyunwoo becomes excited. With an eager look, he decides to explore his new stats. One of the talents he's received is Mana Pathways. The other talent is Mind's Eye, which allows him to see detailed specs, though Lee Hyun-woo isn't sure what the mana pathways skill is, as he's never seen it before. Judging by its name, the skill seems related to magic, but as far as Lee Hyun-woo knows, the best magic talent is the mana companion skill. Nevertheless, Lee Hyun-woo has a feeling that the mana pathways skill might be even more extraordinary than mana companion. Convinced it's a top-tier talent, Lee Hyun-woo believes he'll be unstoppable now. He wonders if mana companion is still the best talent, given that he's acquired what might be the most powerful skill. Trusting his instincts, Lee Hyun-woo reaches out to grab another mana sphere. The moment he touches it, just like before, it explodes with tremendous energy, putting him in awe. Suddenly, vein-like lights course through Lee Hyun-woo's arm, confirming to him that the ability must be top-tier. Lifting his arm slightly, Lee Hyun-woo clenches his fist tightly. With a shocked expression, he admits that with mana pathways, he can see things he never could with mana companion. If he can absorb this pure mana properly, Lee Hyun-woo hopes mana will start flowing throughout his body. As he wills it, the mana can successfully merge with Lee Hyun-woo, helping him break through. Lee Hyun-woo pulls up his shirt sleeve and commands the pure mana in his arm to move according to his will. Closing his eyes, he orders the mana to pierce the blockage. Feeling a sharp pain in his arm, the mana forms into a sharp drill, starting to break through the blockage. With his command, the mana drill successfully cracks the blockage open. Seeing this, Lee Hyun-woo exclaims happily that it worked. He looks at his arm and notices that the mana is actually flowing. Though the mana flow only reaches his elbow, Lee Hyun-woo is hopeful that he can gather more mana to open more pathways and overcome Hermomu's barrier. Now filled with hope, Lee Hyun-woo believes he won't die after all. The scene shifts to a view of the family mansion from the outside. In the kitchen, a plate of soup gets placed on the table. A maid looks down at the food and says it's done. She's about to pick up the plate when another maid tells her, Urgel, not to take the food to Lord Kyle Seltarian. Urgel turns and sees two maids staring at her with stern looks. The brown-haired maid says they've decided to stop serving Kyle Seltarian to protest his rude behavior. The maids think that starving him for a few days might change his attitude, so they tell Urgel to put the plate down. Urgel protests, saying she doesn't care and will do her job. The brown-haired maid gets angry and accuses Urgel of trying to act noble. Suddenly, she slaps the soup out of Urgel's hand, startling her. Urgel, speechless, listens as the maid asks if she still thinks she's a noble. The maid scolds her for acting arrogantly after being sold as a servant. The blue-haired maid, seeing the brown-haired maid, about to charge at Urgel, grabs her. Meanwhile, Urgel quietly bends down and starts picking up the plate's remains. Angered by Urgel's silence, becomes even more infuriated. Unable to control her rage, raises her hand to slap Urgel. Just then, a blonde man arrives, asking what's happening, causing to stop. The blue-haired maid gasps in fright upon seeing him. Startled, addresses the man as Sir Leonhardt. The frightened maid asks why Leonhardt is in the kitchen. Seeing the food on the floor, Leonhardt asks if that was for Lord Kyle. He deduces the maids were harassing Urgel and points out that the meal is already late. Leonhardt instructs Urgel to prepare the meal again and take it to Lord Kyle quickly. Urgel agrees, while the other maids stay silent, though visibly displeased. Urgel re-prepares the meal and leaves the kitchen for Kyle's room. Leonhardt watches her as she departs. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-woo inspects the two talents he just received, confident that he can change the fate of the fallen Marquis family. Having played the game for 10 years, Lee Hyun-woo knows all future events, and with his newfound wealth and power, he believes he can block the forces of darkness. He decides to focus on three main tasks. First, he must clear all his mana channels, overcome Hermomu's barrier, and learn magic to become a mage. Second, he must prevent the downfall of the Marquis family, as its power will provide him with resources. Lastly, the most important task is to gather talents. He likens these tasks to playing chess, where each move must be carefully analyzed. To prepare for the upcoming dark forces, Lee Hyun-woo plans to use insight to recruit people with potential and make them reliable allies. By building strength, Lee Hyun-woo is determined to survive, so he plans to start recruiting quickly. The first recruit on his mind is Leonhardt, who is a useful tank NPC in the game. At that moment, Urgel enters, bringing the meal and calling out for Lord Kyle. Lee Hyun-woo recalls how Kyle used to mistreat her in the game. As Urgel places the meal on the table, Lee Hyun-woo tries to remember her name from the game. Just then, the system activates his insight ability and scans Urgel for her stats and details. Seeing all of Urgel's information displayed, Lee Hyun-woo is taken aback. He realizes that with the insight talent, he can easily view others' entire information. According to the screen, Urgel is 12 years old and has the talent called Eternal Friend of Spirits. Reading this, Lee Hyun-woo is shocked. The Eternal Friend of Spirits is a top-tier spirit summoning talent, as far as Lee Hyun-woo knows. Intrigued by this talent and Urgel herself, Lee Hyun-woo leaps up and stares at her closely. Feeling nervous, Urgel tells him to enjoy his meal and walks away. Lee Hyun-woo wonders why someone with such a powerful talent is working as a maid. A flashback begins, showing an auction a year ago. A man on stage claims to have a special item for sale. Among the audience, Kyle Selterian is sitting with his arms crossed. The auctioneer presents Urgel, the third daughter of the fallen Baron Helheim family, with her hands in handcuffs. He describes her as well-mannered and smart, inviting bids. The audience starts bidding, 70 gold, 90 gold, and so on. Leonhardt, sitting next to Kyle, suggests they leave the filthy place. Instead, Kyle bids 300 gold, shocking Leonhardt. The auctioneer is delighted by the high bid. Leonhardt, unsure, asks Kyle if he really wants to buy a slave and mentions Kyle's father. Kyle angrily tells Leonhardt to stop nagging him, saying his father doesn't care what he does. Kyle gets out of his chair and walks towards the stage, standing right before Urgel. With a dead look on her face, Urgel stares at him as he declares she is now his. Kyle Selterian removes the cuffs from Urgel's hands and tells her she is free now. He notes that she is no longer a slave since he bought her freedom. He adds that she can go wherever she wants as a free person. Urgel remains silent, watching Kyle Selterian and Leonhardt leave, and wonders if she can truly go wherever she wants. She recalls that just moments ago, Kyle Selterian said she belonged to him, so how can she be free? She dashes forward and grabs Kyle Selterian's sleeve. She declares that from now on, she will follow Kyle Selterian. Kyle Selterian stares at Urgel intently. He scoffs in annoyance and tells her to do whatever she wants, then walks away. At present, Lee Hyun-woo, having gone through the flashback, is stunned by what he saw. He realizes he just experienced Kyle Selterian's memories. He understands that Urgel became a maid for the Marquis family because Kyle took her in when she was about to be sold. Feeling the emotions Kyle had toward Urgel, Lee Hyun-woo reflects that he's truly merged with Kyle, sharing the feeling of being abandoned by the world without control over fate. Lee Hyun-woo takes a spoonful of soup and instantly finds it delicious. He asks Urgel if she made the soup herself. Thinking she made a mistake, Urgel asks if something is wrong, but Lee Hyun-woo assures her it's delicious and praises her cooking skills. Smiling warmly, he tells her to make it again for him next time. Urgel, surprised by the praise, is taken aback. Despite this, she agrees to make the soup again. Lee Hyun-woo notices that Urgel's affection for him is 35, which isn't high, given her dramatic encounter with Kyle. Based on Kyle's behavior, Lee Hyun-woo thinks it's a miracle Urgel still has some affection for him. In the game Fantasy Defense, there was no spirit mage NPC named Urgel, and Lee Hyun-woo suspects she was caught in the internal rebellion of the Marquis family and died before her talent could bloom. This time, Lee Hyun-woo vows not to let that happen and asks Urgel if she has ever considered learning spirit magic. He adds that Urgel seems to have talent for learning spirit magic. Hearing this, Urgel falls silent. She admits that she never imagined she had talent for spirit magic. Lee Hyun-woo assumes she has never encountered spirit magic before. Since spirit magic is particularly expensive, it's likely that a lower-ranked noble family couldn't afford to educate Urgel. Deciding to handle this later, Lee Hyun-woo suggests that Urgel think about learning spirit magic. Urgel hesitates, but Lee Hyun-woo makes it clear that she cannot refuse. Getting out of bed, Lee Hyun-woo stands in front of Urgel and tells her that she must follow his orders. With gleaming eyes and a blank expression, Urgel stares at Lee Hyun-woo as he declares that she belongs to him now. Deeply touched, Urgel blushes. The system notifies Lee Hyun-woo that Urgel's affection for him has increased to 50 days later. Lee Hyun-woo looks nervous as he stares at someone before him. It's Leonhardt, who is also staring down at Lee Hyun-woo with the same intense gaze. The two of them stand at the mansion's front door, staring at each other. Lee Hyun-woo asks Leonhardt to move aside to let him out, but Leonhardt refuses. Lee Hyun-woo becomes furious and frowns. He waves his hand, complaining that he hasn't been outside in days, but Leonhardt points out that he cannot leave without the master's permission. With a serious tone, Leonhardt asks if Lee Hyun-woo has forgotten the master's orders. Lee Hyun-woo remembers that the family had grounded Kyle Selterian and confined him because of the trouble he caused. However, Lee Hyun-woo knows there isn't much time left, and he needs to act. Since discovering that he can open up mana channels, Lee Hyun-woo has been absorbing mana in his room daily. Although it wasn't enough to open the channels all at once, it accumulated in Lee Hyun-woo's body like EXP points in a game. Now, Lee Hyun-woo's physical condition has improved significantly, but this isn't enough to cure her mesmu, so Lee Hyun-woo needs to go out and gather more mana, and he is trying to convince Leonhardt to let him leave. He promises that he won't go far and will only exercise nearby the mansion. Hearing the word exercise, Leonhardt remarks that this is the first time Lee Hyunwoo has given a constructive reason. Lee Hyunwoo realizes that Leonhardt is an impenetrable wall. He admits to himself that reasoning with Leonhardt is almost impossible. Leonhardt, currently Kyle Selterian's bodyguard, is a famous character from fantasy defense. Leonhardt excels in both defense and offense and has high potential, capable of becoming a captain-level knight and serving as a tank in parties. Leonhardt was highly popular among players due to his loyalty trait, which ensured he would never betray. In the original game, after the downfall of the Marquis family, Leonhardt became a wandering knight who could be recruited by players. But right now, since the Second Son's rebellion hasn't happened yet, Leonhardt is still at the Marquis Selterian mansion. Lee Hyunwoo is displeased that someone as talented as Leonhardt is being wasted as a babysitter. Sighing, he asks Leonhardt why he is here. Leonhardt, not pleased by the question, asks if Lee Hyunwoo has a problem with having him as a bodyguard. To Lee Hyunwoo's horror, Leonhardt's affection for him drops by 60 points. Lee Hyunwoo quickly responds that he has no problem with Leonhardt. Leonhardt sighs silently and advises Lee Hyunwoo to follow the master's orders. Lee Hyunwoo realizes that Leonhardt's loyalty is not to him but to the master, Remtun Selterian. However, that's expected, as no one would be loyal to a delinquent like Kyle Selterian. Lee Hyunwoo instructs Leonhardt to go and convince his father to let him out. Hearing this request, Leonhardt remains silent, sensing that Kyle Selterian seems a little different. Lee Hyunwoo presses for an answer and asks Leonhardt if he will agree to speak to his father. With a happy and anticipated look, Lee Hyunwoo, from now on we will be calling him Kyle Selterian, asks Leonhardt if he will help him. Meanwhile, Leonhardt gives a suspicious glance at Kyle Selterian's changed attitude and questions him about his scheming, to which Kyle Selterian protests that he isn't. Kyle Selterian mentions that he has been in his room for too long, and that has changed his thoughts. With a smile, he adds that he wants to live a long and happy life from now on. Hearing this, Leonhardt is completely taken aback. He is surprised that someone like Kyle Selterian wants to live longer, considering he has given up everything due to the incurable disease he suffers from. It's common knowledge that Kyle Selterian doesn't have much time left to live. On top of that, he lacks both magical talents and swordsmanship skills. Furthermore, since he is the youngest, he can never inherit the family's wealth. Master Remtun Selterian had once given Leonhardt permission to keep Kyle Selterian by his side. He had asked Leonhardt if he resented him for making such a decision and holding him back. However, Leonhardt didn't respond. He remained quiet for a few seconds before stating that it's an honor to protect a direct descendant of the Marquis family. Bowing down, Leonhardt vowed to fulfill his duties, receiving praise from Remtun Selterian for his loyalty. For this very loyalty, Remtun Selterian expressed his desire to have Leonhardt by his son's side. He added that in this vast Marquis household, he trusts no one more than Leonhardt to protect Kyle. Once again, Master Remtun Selterian requested Leonhardt to take good care of Kyle. Leonhardt took this order to heart and promised to do everything he could to protect Kyle Selterian. The flashbacks run through Leonhardt's mind as Kyle Selterian declares he wants to live long and be healthy, so exercise is necessary. Kyle Selterian also requests Leonhardt to relay this to his father, believing he might understand. Now even more hopeful and smiling, Kyle Selterian turns on the spot, asking if it's alright for him to go outside. With Kyle Selterian still requesting to go out, Leonhardt extends his arms, blocking his way, and tells him to exercise indoors. Disapproved, Kyle Selterian gives a disappointed look. Having had enough of requesting, Kyle Selterian warns Leonhardt to move aside, insisting he won't repeat himself and wants to go outside. Spoken to like this by Kyle Selterian, Leonhardt remains rooted to the spot in silence. He begins to sense a different aura emanating from Kyle Selterian, something he has never felt before. Leonhardt admits that something is genuinely different about Kyle Selterian, but that doesn't matter because he has his orders. Thus, he makes it clear that the Marquis' order is absolute, and this applies to Kyle Selterian as well. Leonhardt adds that if Kyle Selterian wants to go out, he must first get past him. Upon seeing the terrifying aura released from Kyle Selterian, he recoils in fright, feeling a killing intent behind his anger. Kyle Selterian steps back, noting that if he were an ordinary 13-year-old, he would have wet himself in fear and collapsed from Leonhardt's scary aura. With a smirk, he tells Leonhardt to keep his word, which causes Leonhardt to look shocked. Raising his hand, Kyle Selterian uses his mana to clear the aura in his way, and since he's not an ordinary 13-year-old, he walks forward past Leonhardt with ease. Leonhardt shifts his gaze to the corner to watch as Kyle Salterian passes by him. With this, Kyle Salterian successfully walks out the door despite Leonhardt standing guard. Once outside, Kyle Salterian turns around and, looking at Leonhardt, mentions that he just got past him. It's nighttime outside, and the cool air blows, instantly refreshing Kyle Salterian. He stretches his arms happily, noting it has been too long since he last went outside. He finds the sky and the garden more beautiful, perhaps because he hasn't seen them for so long. His eyes sparkle with a glorious look as he observes the mana particles scattered everywhere around him. Without wasting a second, he begins jumping around, devouring all the mana particles while Leonhardt watches him. From Leonhardt's perspective, he thinks Kyle Salterian is simply delighted to be outside and is jumping with joy. However, he still feels happy for Kyle Salterian's joy. Then, he recalls how Kyle Salterian walked past him despite the released killing aura and is unable to comprehend how this is possible. How can this be the case when Kyle Salterian has never trained in mana or aura? Therefore, Kyle Salterian should never have been able to withstand the pressure he exerted earlier, let alone walk past it. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian continues devouring the mana particles and pauses upon seeing Leonhardt deep in thought. He assumes Leonhardt must still be rattled by what happened earlier. The reason why Kyle Salterian was able to withstand Leonhardt's killing intent is that Lee Hyunwoo, possessing Kyle Salterian, is mentally strong after playing this game for 10 years. This game, Fantasy Defense, was famous for its realistic depictions through VR. While grinding through the game, Lee Hyunwoo became desensitized to the edge-of-your-seat life-or-death moments countless times. He witnessed horrific sights, wading through piles of corpses, and being drenched in blood many times. Having faced such events, a little scare tactic like killing intent would never be enough to frighten Lee Hyunwoo inside Kyle Salterian's body. This is far too easy for Kyle Salterian to handle. After collecting enough mana particles, Kyle Salterian thinks this will be sufficient for him to clear more mana channels. After a moment of contemplation, Leonhardt walks towards Kyle Salterian and requests to be punished for his earlier actions. He points out that although he was following orders, it was wrong of him to direct killing intent at the one he is supposed to protect. Thus, he requests punishment, but Kyle Salterian declares that's not necessary. With a little smile, he also notes that if Leonhardt reports this incident to Master Remton Salterian, he should say, Kyle Salterian does not wish for Leonhardt to be punished. A while later, after Leonhardt relays everything to Remton Salterian, it leaves Remton Salterian in shock. Unsure if this is true, Remton Salterian asks Leonhardt if he should really believe this, and Leonhardt swears that all he said is true. Remton Salterian clarifies that he isn't accusing Leonhardt of lying, it's just hard to believe, which Leonhardt agrees with, saying even he couldn't believe it with his own eyes. He explains that when Kyle Salterian faced his killing intent, HR remained calm and faced it easily, even smiling. Remton Salterian points out that for Kyle Salterian to resist Leonhardt's killing intent, there must be a reason. He questions Leonhardt about what Kyle Salterian did after entering the garden. Leonhardt thinks back to what happened earlier in the garden. He then responds that Kyle Salterian simply sat down cross-legged, joined his hands, and started meditating. The night is at its peak, and the moon shines a blue light upon the garden, illuminating the plants and structures in an eerie glow. There, Kyle Salterian is sitting cross-legged, his hands joined in a formation in his lap, eyes closed, and meditating. Standing nearby and watching Kyle Salterian is Leonhardt. Leonhardt questions Kyle Salterian on how he learned to meditate, to which Kyle Salterian replies that his father taught him when he was younger. He adds that he quit shortly after, as he believed he had no talent or use for meditation. Hearing this, Leonhardt remains silent as Kyle Salterian instructs him not to let anyone approach while he is meditating. Kyle Salterian explains that anyone coming too close will disrupt his focus, and Leonhardt agrees. After explaining the events to Remton Salterian, Leonhardt mentions that Kyle Salterian didn't move an inch, meditating in the same spot for 6 hours. Shocked to hear this, Remton Salterian asks if it's 6 seconds or 6 hours, and Leonhardt confirms it's 6 hours. This revelation leaves Remton Salterian puzzled and suspicious about what has happened to Kyle as he begins to think deeply. He recalls that when Kyle was younger, he tried to teach him swordsmanship, as it was expected of Kyle to follow the path of swordsmanship, being a descendant of the Salterian family. Remton Salterian adds that he also wanted Kyle to overcome Hermesmu, but Kyle was hopeless. Just minutes into the training, Kyle would give up, falling to his knees, shaking with fatigue. Kyle would complain that his legs felt tangled, rendering him unable unable to move. Being a tough father, Celterian would shout at Kyle to get up and try harder, sometimes scolding him in anger for being the weakest in their family. This only caused Kyle more pain, and Celterian would turn and leave, leaving Kyle to his thoughts. Despite lacking talent for swordsmanship, determination, and patience, Kyle managed to meditate for 6 hours, greatly confusing Celterian. Unsure, Celterian wonders if Kyle might have hit his head or something, and Leonhardt assures him he even checked Kyle's food and found nothing strange. Leonhardt points out that Kyle certainly seems different now, not just in his newfound determination. He adds that the way Kyle looks at him has changed as well. Sighing, Celterian concludes that Kyle must be growing up and recognizing his responsibilities, which isn't a bad thing. He then states that he will overlook this matter himself and instructs Leonhardt to continue keeping watch over Kyle. Leonhardt agrees to the command. The next day, in his room, Celterian is channeling his mana, ready to pierce through the mana blockages in his body. Seated on his bed with his eyes closed, Celterian raises his hand, releasing a tremendous amount of mana. The system notifies him that mana is overflowing, and his sharp perception has enhanced, allowing him to accurately assess the condition of his own body. Eyes still closed, Celterian thinks this is good. He forms a mental image of his body in his mind, and decides to break through the mana channels all the way to his heart. The mana transforms into sharp points and begins piercing through the blockages, starting from his arms. It then travels to his shoulders, followed by his spine. Finally, the pointed form of mana pierces the mana blockage of his heart, causing a slight sting of pain in Celterian. After the process is successful, the system notifies Celterian that the path to his heart has been cleared. The block channels trait begins to weaken, and the amount of mana flowing around Celterian causes his hair to stand on end as he clenches his fist. With a smile, he exclaims that it's all done. He notes that he gathered mana from outside and cleared the path all the way to his heart, and now he can use magic. With this settled, he tightens his fist and excitedly declares that he will begin serious magic training. In this world, to use magic, one needs to form a circle near their heart. The higher level magic one wishes to use, the greater the number of circles that need to be formed, the greater the number of circles that must be created, the longer it takes to form those circles. That's why those who want to become mages need to start their magic training at ages 5 to 8. By the age of 12, they should form their first circle to be considered suited for the path of a mage. Based on these standards, Celterian, now 13 years old, is a bit late to start learning magic. However, that was when Celterian was just an ordinary NPC. Since Celterian possesses the mana delay talent, his situation is quite different now. With the mana delay and his mana cleared to the heart, Celterian is finally in a state where he can learn magic. He only needs to form the circle. However, he isn't sure how he can create a circle. At that moment, someone arrives outside the room and calls out to Celterian, revealing himself to be Leonhardt. Celterian is shocked as Leonhardt informs him that his father has lifted the restrictions preventing him from going outside. Leonhardt confirms this is true, but there's a condition. He must accompany Celterian outside. As Celterian begins to cheer happily, Leonhardt adds that Celterian won't be able to go beyond the gates of the mansion, though. However, Celterian doesn't care about leaving the mansion, as he is happy to be allowed into the garden, which is already good enough. Leonhardt's affection for Celterian increases by 30 points, falling from -50 to -20 points. Seeing the affection score increase, Celterian feels puzzled as to why. He wonders if it might be because Leonhardt was moved by seeing him meditate all night the previous day. He recalls that he passed out after meditating for 6 hours straight, which might have touched Leonhardt, seeing someone work so hard. Then, Celterian gets an idea and tells Leonhardt to accompany him to go somewhere, prompting Leonhardt to ask where they are going. Celterian suggests Leonhardt follow him to find out. Shortly after, the two of them arrive at a library. A girl with large glasses, probably the librarian, looks terrified upon seeing Celterian there and asks how he got there. Still shaken, she moves closer to Leonhardt and asks him what is going on. Leonhardt explains that Celterian's restrictions have been lifted, and he can now travel outside. The librarian enters a flashback where she recalls crying, terrified due to Celterian's presence. Celterian picks up some books and begins tearing pages, causing the librarian to shout out, begging him not to destroy the books, which are real ones. She claims the book is rare and she barely got her hands on it, and as she cries, she begs Celterian not to tear it. However, Celterian remains stubborn, grabbing a candle and stating that he will not only tear the book but burn it too. too, as the librarian screams even louder. Now, in the present, the librarian is crying once again, mentioning that Kyle Salterian was banned from this library after that incident and asks why he is back. Kyle Salterian clears his throat with a cough to get their attention and states that he's just here to read books, asking if there are any related to magic. The librarian responds that they only have introductory level books for beginners, as the Duke's family has always emphasized swordsmanship, and Kyle Salterian notes that's enough. He instructs the librarian to go and bring him the books that explain how to form circles. Once he receives the books, Kyle Salterian begins reading aloud from them, learning about mana and different energies. He discovers that supernatural energy is a term defined by a scholar and is associated with various phenomena. Reading through this tedious history, Kyle Salterian quickly grows bored. Frustrated, he wonders why this introductory book is so complicated and not to the point. He thinks these books are meant for 7-year-olds, so he wonders how they can even understand this information. Just then, the system activates spiritual vision, startling Kyle Salterian. The system notifies him that the book he is holding is a low-level text and begins translating the content. Seeing this, Kyle Salterian becomes more attentive, watching in awe as the system continues the translation. His eyes sparkle with delight as the loading reaches 100% and the system successfully translates the introductory book, filling Kyle Salterian with excitement and happiness. The system completes the translation, and Kyle Salterian gives an excited look, realizing he can use the insight skill to decode books as well. Since this is the case, Kyle Salterian sees no reason to stay in the library any longer, so he instructs the librarian, Alice, to bring out more introductory books. After gathering all the books he needs, he decides to borrow them. Later that day, back in the family mansion, Leonhardt helps carry all the books to the mansion. Leonhardt mentions he finished bringing all the books as Kyle Salterian, busy going through them, tells Leonhardt he did well. Whistling longingly with a smile, Kyle Salterian begins stacking the books in his arms. Looking unsure, Leonhardt asks Kyle Salterian if he is okay, prompting Kyle Salterian to ask what he means. Leonhardt points out that Kyle Salterian borrowed a lot of books at once, making the librarian really worried, as Kyle Salterian assures him. Just a few days ago, Kyle Salterian was known to hate books, and seeing his sudden love for them, Leonhardt is puzzled. The books include Guide to Mana Usage, Basics of Circle Formation, and Leonhardt gives them a suspicious look. He reminds Kyle Salterian that Hermama's disease blocks the body's channels, preventing mana and aura flow, and advises him not to get his hopes up. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian, with a smirk, says he knew Leonhardt was going to say that. Leonhardt apologizes for overstepping, and Kyle Salterian assures him that it's fine. Kyle Salterian admits that he knows everyone in this house thinks the same, believing he is doing bizarre things. He also adds that he is the infamous, disowned youngest son, so his actions won't surprise anyone. Rising to his feet and facing Leonhardt, Kyle Salterian acknowledges his concern but reiterates that, as he said before, he doesn't plan to die young. Lifting his clenched fist, Kyle Salterian turns around, confidently stating he'll do everything he can. Saying so, he walks away, yawning, deciding to lie down for a while and continue reading. Speechless at Kyle Salterian's confidence, Leonhardt is left baffled in silence. He looks over at Kyle Salterian, who is now on his back on his bed, the book held over his head, reading through it. Kyle Salterian has a happy and cheerful look on his face as he continues gazing into the book. The Kyle Salterian Leonhardt remembers was very different. One day, while in training, Kyle Salterian gave up and was weeping bitterly, calling out for his father. Leonhardt had arrived there, and kneeling behind Kyle Salterian, asked him why he was crying. Turning around to reveal tears streaming down his cheeks, Kyle Salterian wailed out that his father said he didn't need him. Leonhardt was surprised to hear this and extended his arms to try and calm Kyle Salterian. Remembering this memory, Leonhardt admits that Kyle Salterian was just a little crying kid back then. But now, Kyle Salterian is completely different, all grown up as he turns sideways to look at Leonhardt. Suddenly, he receives a shock as he sees Leonhardt's favorability towards him has reached 0, while it was -30 just a moment ago, and he wonders what he did to make this happen. Leonhardt puts the book on Kyle Salterian's bed and says he will wait outside, telling Kyle Salterian to call him if he needs anything. Slightly taken aback by Leonhardt's kind tone, Kyle Salterian agrees to his suggestion. As Leonhardt walks out of the room with a smile on his face, Kyle Salterian stares after him, still wearing a shocked expression. He then wonders why there wasn't any change in favorability points back in the library. He notes that Leonhardt usually appreciates persistence and assumes that since he read a lot of books, Leonhardt might have seen it as such. Since Leonhardt is outside, Kyle Salterian decides to use his skill and do the actual reading now. Activating the insight skill, he begins scanning and decoding the contents of the books all at once. Many screens pop pop up around Kyle Salterian, and they all begin translating the contents of the books. Giving a pleased look, Kyle Salterian admits the speed of insight is truly impressive. It's dozens of times faster than normal reading. On top of that, the difficult parts of the books get translated into easily understandable data as well. Once the decoding of the books is complete, the system digitizes their data and saves it in storage. The system notifies Kyle Salterian of his increased understanding, accelerating the decoding process until all the books in the space get decoded within seconds. Kyle Salterian exclaims in surprise at such speed. He moves on to the next step, forming a circle using the decoded data. The system informs him that Kyle Salterian has understood the principles of circle formation and confirms that he satisfies the minimum requirements to form a first circle. Kyle Salterian declares that by directing mana along a certain golden path, he can form a circle. He follows the steps and instructs the mana to move, causing a fiery circle to appear outside, right around his heart. The energy released from this process causes the nearby books to open up and their pages to flutter as if caught in a strong wind. The circle begins intensifying, and the mana follows the path. Kyle Salterian starts feeling a little pain as he groans softly. He claims he feels like his chest is burning, but he remains strong and endures it so he won't damage his organs. The pain grows, but Kyle Salterian holds himself still, knowing only a few more seconds remain. The fiery circle begins to be replaced by circular runes, and although the pain intensifies, Kyle Salterian remains fixed in place just a little longer. The process is nearly complete. The fiery circle is almost gone, and it finally finishes. Opening his eyes, Kyle Salterian wonders if he succeeded. The system notifies him that he has formed a first circle and that his block channels have weakened. Kyle Salterian gazes intently at the circular rune near his chest as the system informs him that his mana stagnation has intensified. Now, Kyle Salterian is able to store refined mana in the circle, and he exclaims that he can properly use magic. Getting to his feet, he cheers happily that he did it. With dark circles under his eyes, he realizes it's already morning, meaning he pulled an all-nighter. Now, he worries that Leonhardt and Urgel will scold him for this. Right then, he falls down onto the ground, passing out from exhaustion. At that moment, Urgel opens the door and walks in, announcing she's brought breakfast for Kyle Salterian. Once in the room, she sees Kyle Salterian lying on the floor. So, she quickly runs forward and begins shaking Kyle Salterian hard, asking why he is on the floor and what happened. Unknown to Urgel, Kyle Salterian used all the mana he had accumulated to form a first circle, so he is exhausted with no energy left. From now on, a new chapter in Kyle Salterian's life, the official mage, has begun. Meanwhile, Leonhardt takes all the books to return them to the library, and seeing the books torn, the librarian nearly passes out. The meal is laden as Urgel finishes the final touches. After fully preparing the meal, she announces that it's done. With a dreamy expression, she imagines presenting the food to Kyle Salterian, who praises her, saying it is delicious. A small smile appears on her lips at this thought. Happily, she picks up the tray of food and turns to take it to Kyle Salterian's room. At that moment, the other two maids appear, asking if the food is for Kyle Salterian. Hey says she and the other maid will deliver the food instead, suggesting Urgel go and rest. Puzzled, Urgel asks what the maids mean, and Hay points out that serving Kyle Salterian is Sally's responsibility, not hers. Hearing this, Urgel remains silent for a moment, then firmly declares that she doesn't want to change her task. She sternly suggests the two maids speak directly to Kyle Salterian if they want to change their responsibilities. Saying so, she walks away, taking the two maids by surprise, as Hay angrily shouts for Urgel to stop. At that moment, the blue-haired maid appears at the door, blocking Urgel's way. Urgel stares intently at the blue-haired maid, who smiles back at her, confused by the commotion in the kitchen. Urgel ignores the blue-haired maid and walks away too, while the two other maids fume in anger at being ignored. With a serious expression, the blue-haired maid turns her head and glares at Urgel disapprovingly. Once Urgel delivers the food, Kyle Salterian begins digging in and takes a bite of meat. Urgel asks if the food suits Kyle Salterian's taste, claiming she changed the recipe, and he exclaims that it's delicious. Looking a little pleased, Urgel says she's been practicing hard every day to cook better. She adds that she learned new recipes from the head chef, prompting Kyle Salterian to praise her hard work. After clearing his plate, Kyle Salterian rests his hands on the table and asks Urgel how her progress is going with spirit magic. Hearing this, Urgel gives a nervous look as Kyle Selterian asks her to bring the book he gave her. Urgel complies and presents the book to Kyle Selterian, who goes through it. He then asks her how far she has read the book. Urgel claims she has read about halfway through the book. Hearing she's read halfway, Kyle Selterian inspects the worn pages and assumes she has been studying diligently, thinking she must be quite talented. However, he gives a stern look and points out that this pace won't be enough for her to improve quickly. Since time is limited, Kyle Selterian tells Urgel she must learn more and faster to become stronger. In exactly 2 months, the Selterian family will hold their heir succession ceremony. On that day, a coup led by the second son, Adolf, will occur, causing the Marquis family to fall, and Urgel, caught up in the coup, will perish as well. For this reason, Kyle Selterian wants Urgel to be stronger, deciding to leave the cooking job to someone else so she can focus solely on her studies. He promises to help her concentrate harder and assures her not to worry about serving him again. Grabbing her robes tightly, Urgel disagrees with Kyle Selterian's suggestion, startling him. She increases her grip on her robes as if nervous and declares that she will study as well as cook, begging him not to allow anyone else to serve him. Her eyes fill with tears and her cheeks redden. Kyle Selterian is completely baffled by Urgel's behavior. He stares sympathetically at her as she continues sobbing. Then he recalls how Urgel lost her family in an instant and became a from being the daughter of a baronet. She has lost contact with her family, not knowing if they are alive or dead, so it's natural for her to feel insecure. After a long time of hardship, she has finally started adjusting to life as a maid, and since she's just been told to study magic and leave her job, she is confused. Kyle Selterian blames himself for not explaining the situation properly, so he calls out to Urgel and asks if she remembers he told her she is his when he brought her in. He mentions that he's not someone who would ever abandon his own people and will always protect them. Hearing this, Urgel ceases her tears, and a look of wonder replaces her eyes. Kyle Selterian then points out that he didn't ask her to learn spirit magic for no reason. He mentions that Urgel is an excellent maid with good cooking skills and confidently says if she keeps working this way, she will surely be promoted to head maid. However, he also adds that there are plenty of maids in the mansion besides Urgel, meaning she can be replaced anytime and lose her position. Seeing her so anxious, Kyle Selterian places a hand on her shoulder to calm her down and then asks her what she thinks will happen if she becomes a spirit mage. At this question, Urgel remains silent, seemingly lost for answers. Kyle Selterian continues, reminding her that mages are highly respected. If she learns magic, she will become a great person, a respected spirit mage everyone will look up to. He adds that Urgel will stand tall among all the great people, and by then, no one in the world will be able to replace her. Explaining all this, Kyle Selterian asks Urgel if that sounds amazing, while Urgel, still unsure, asks if she can really do it, which Kyle Selterian affirms she can. Picking up the previous book from the table, he hands it over to her, confidently saying she can truly become the greatest spirit mage. This touches Urgel, giving her courage as she accepts the book, promising to work hard. Closing her eyes, she hugs the book and says she completely trusts Kyle Selterian. With this, her affection for him increases to +60. Kyle Selterian smiles widely at Urgel. After this event, he officially appoints her as his personal maid. Urgel begins handling most of Kyle Selterian's personal affairs, and he moves her out of the shared maid quarters into a private room. Showing her the new room, he tells her it will belong to her from now on. While Urgel exclaims with excitement, Kyle Selterian hopes this room will be better for Urgel's studies and her security. Urgel says she loves the room and, with a wide smile, notes it's so close to Kyle Selterian's room too. Not expecting such reasoning, Kyle Selterian, puzzled, asks if that's really what she likes the most, to which she affirms. He then suggests they work hard together and survive no matter what. The next day, while in her room selecting a book to read, Urgel looks out of the window. She spots Kyle Selterian walking with Leonhardt, both heading somewhere. Kyle Selterian also catches sight of Urgel watching him out of the corner of his eye, so he turns to her and merely waves. Taken aback at first, Urgel leans on the window and looks pleased as her affection for Kyle Selterian increases to 65. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the blue-haired maid approaches a man sitting down, saying she has a report to deliver. As the maid delivers the report, the man makes an excited snapping noise. He asks if Kyle Selterian has really changed, to which the maid affirms it's true, addressing him as Lord Adolf. She explains that Kyle Selterian has recently been exercising and building strength while also dedicating a lot of time to studying magic. She adds that Kyle Selterian's personality has also improved. He is no longer harsh with the servants. Adolf seems surprised, asking if his foolish brother has finally grown up. So, as the second brother, Adolf declares he will now pay a visit to Kyle Salterian. Looking out of the window, Urgel waves happily at Kyle Salterian, walking along the garden below. Kyle Salterian, walking alongside Leonhardt, instructs him to take him to an open space, somewhere out of sight, as he wants to experiment with something. He adds that the experiment will be related to magic. Hearing the word magic, Leonhardt appears a little taken aback. He then mentions that there's a suitable place on the outermost part of the estate. Once they arrive at that location, they find it secluded by dense trees, and Kyle Salterian excitedly exclaims that it's perfect. He then commands Leonhardt to keep watch and let no one come close. With Leonhardt on guard, Kyle Salterian begins his preparation, taking deep breaths and stretching his arms. Still surprised by Kyle Salterian talking about magic, Leonhardt recalls that Kyle Salterian has Hermann's disease, and therefore cannot master magic. Kyle Salterian raises his hand and summons an energy ball above his palms, then fires a golden lightning bolt straight ahead. The lightning bolt, shaped like an arrow, flies towards a tree and pierces its stem. Seeing this, Kyle Salterian looks excited while Leonhardt is utterly shocked. From the impact, a large gaping hole appears in the tree's stem. Realizing he overdid the magic, Kyle Salterian is horror-stricken. The tree falls and crashes to the ground. Sounding worried, Kyle Salterian asks Leonhardt if anyone might have heard the sound, but Leonhardt assures him that he used aura to suppress the explosion. Looking relieved, Kyle Salterian praises Leonhardt's reflexes. Meanwhile, Leonhardt, still taken aback, questions Kyle Salterian about when he formed a magic circle. Kyle Salterian explains that it wasn't long ago, and he simply followed the book's instructions, assuring Leonhardt that it worked correctly before he could ask further. Summoning a mana sphere above his palms, Kyle Salterian confirms that he has now overcome Hermann's disease. Overwhelmed by the news, Leonhardt remains silent, staring at the now confident Kyle Salterian. He recalls how Kyle Salterian mentioned earlier that he didn't want to die young and would do everything he could. Now, everything makes sense to Leonhardt. With a smile, Leonhardt congratulates Kyle Salterian on his new development. At that moment, Leonhardt's favorability toward Kyle Salterian increases by 10 points. And seeing this, Kyle Salterian acknowledges that Leonhardt is indeed a man of perseverance. Leonhardt then mentions that the magic missile Kyle Salterian used earlier is a first circle spell, which typically doesn't carry much power. However, the damage caused by Kyle Salterian's magic suggests it was more powerful, resembling a fourth circle spell. Kyle Salterian notes that he's still at the first circle level, but managed to unleash fourth circle power with a first circle spell and asks if that isn't impressive. Leonhardt gives a bewildered expression, and Kyle Salterian admits that even he didn't expect such power. Leonhardt starts wondering if Kyle Salterian might be a prodigy, while Kyle Salterian points out that the power he's showing is too noticeable. Thanks to insight, Kyle Salterian has read all the first circle magic books in the library, and without that skill, it would have taken him a month just to form a circle. However, while analyzing, Kyle Salterian has one question: why is the magic decoded by insight different from the game? According to the magic books, to cast magic, one must first draw a complex magic circle, then perform a few calculations before circulating their mana. As Kyle Salterian calls it, this is the definition of old school. In the game, casting magic was much simpler. One could just draw a magic symbol with mana, and it would activate instantly. Kyle Salterian got curious about what would happen if he used magic in a user-friendly way, like in the game, but discovered the power is too strong. This, Kyle Salterian believes, will be a major problem because he can't afford to reveal his strength yet. So, he asks Leonhardt to keep everything he just saw a secret, even from the head of the house, and to keep it between them. At that moment, Leonhardt's favorability for Kyle Salterian drops significantly, startling him. Kyle Salterian tries to reason that there's a valid reason for keeping this a secret, prompting Leonhardt to ask why. Kyle Salterian mentions the succession ceremony in 2 months and asks if Leonhardt is aware of it. The succession ceremony, traditionally in the Marquis of Salterian family, does not choose the successor by age, but through competition. Personality, swordsmanship, wisdom, and knowledge are all evaluated. This process is designed to select the most promising heir to lead the family to greater prosperity. Currently, 2 individuals are fiercely competing for the position of heir. Those 2 are the eldest son, Abel Salterian, and the second son, Adolf Salterian. First, let's introduce these 2 characters. Abel Salterian, the eldest son, is currently the most likely candidate for heir. With a gentle nature and excellent swordsmanship, having been groomed as the heir since childhood, he is highly regarded by the family's long-serving retainers. Adolf Salterian, though overshadowed by Abel, possesses good swordsmanship skills and has managed to stand out, garnering support primarily from younger knights. Adolf gives off the vibe of a gang leader. Right now, the two brothers are standing before each other as Adolf glares at Abel with a loathing stare. Adolf asks Abel if he's ignoring his younger brother. Looking back at Adolf, Abel notes that it's been a while since they last met. Abel claims he was lost in thought and didn't notice Adolf. Adolf retorts that Abel manifested aura at 5 years old, yet pretends not to sense someone's presence. Abel responds that it's a story from long ago, nothing worth bragging about, as it was a childhood fluke. Abel then asks if Adolf didn't manifest aura at 15. A man standing behind Abel mentions that his son was the same and that he worried his son lacked talent. Hearing the man mock Adolf, the men behind Adolf angrily clench their fists, asking if the man wants to die. Adolf shouts at his men to stop. With his eyes blazing in anger, he snarls that they are in the main house and can't act recklessly, prompting his men to apologize. Abel, analyzing the situation, notes that Adolf has trained his subordinates well. He then says that Adolf is truly worthy of being a candidate for the heir of the Marquis of Salterian, a hint of a smile in his tone. Smirking back, Adolf tells Abel to laugh all he wants. He steps closer to Abel, gritting his teeth, and says that Abel won't be laughing for much longer. With that, Adolf calls his men, and they leave. Abel slightly turns his head to watch Adolf leave, a hateful expression on his face. While dining at the table, Kyle Salterian mentions that the succession ceremony is only 2 months away. He raises a piece of meat to his mouth, noting that the Salterian Marquis doesn't follow the principle of primogeniture. Urgel and Leonhardt listen silently as Kyle Salterian explains that the only criterion for selection is strength, and any direct descendant of the father can compete. Taking another chunk of meat, Kyle Salterian also notes that there's an exception, and that is him. Due to his illness, he was removed from the succession race early on, and along with him, the third older brother, Duke, is also not involved in the succession struggle. So, the current succession landscape is that the eldest brother, Abel Salterian, and the second eldest brother, Adolf Salterian, will be having a duel between them. Abel Salterian and Adolf Salterian, with so little time left until the ceremony, wouldn't welcome any unexpected developments. But what will happen if it becomes known that Kyle Salterian has such great power in this kind of situation? What would happen if a good-for-nothing, who was never considered a threat, suddenly emerges as a dark horse? This might cause two possible reactions. Either of the brothers might try to bring Kyle Salterian to their side, or they might try to crush him while he is still not that big of a threat. As Kyle Salterian explains all this, Urgel and Leonhardt still keep silent and listen intently. Kyle Salterian mentions that though his thinking might be extreme, there have been instances of bloodshed over succession in history. According to the game's settings, Abel Salterian is considered good, so Kyle Salterian is not worried about him. But Adolf Salterian, on the other hand, will definitely try and Kyle Salterian. From the very beginning, Adolf Salterian has been planning to wipe out his entire family. Kyle Salterian's current position is that of someone who has just surpassed Hermamu, showing promise for the future but with limited skills, making his abilities suited for a young first circle wizard. Kyle Salterian thinks it would be good to bring Adolf Salterian to his side, but if he doesn't, then the damage won't be too severe. Yet still, Leonhardt keeps silent and only listens, and then he sighs and says he understands. Getting up to his feet, Leonhardt notes that wizards often conceal their abilities to protect themselves, and some even pretend to downplay their circle level. Leonhardt then says he will stay silent for now, but after the succession ceremony, he will report to the head of the family about Kyle Salterian. Kyle Salterian thinks this is the best Leonhardt can do for him since he has low favorability for him. Leonhardt's current loyalty is fully to the head of the family, not to Kyle Salterian, so it's no surprise that Leonhardt won't support him. No matter, Kyle Salterian plans to eventually make Leonhardt favor and follow him. As Leonhardt turns to walk away, Kyle Salterian stares at him from behind, with an intent to definitely gain his favor. Leonhardt turns his head and asks Kyle Salterian if he's really serious about becoming a wizard. Kyle Salterian points out that his family is known for its swordsmanship, so having a skilled wizard among them won't be too bad. Hearing this, Leonhardt gives a little smile and says that's good. He adds that the head of the family will be really happy with Kyle Salterian, and right then, his favorability for Kyle Salterian increases to 30. Seeing the favorability rise, Kyle Salterian is shocked as Leonhardt begins praising Urgel's cooking. Kyle Salterian wonders if dining together with Leonhardt might increase favorability, so he decides to make Leonhardt dine with him from now on and orders him to do that. Later that night, in his room, books scattered all over the floor, Kyle Salterian lies down while going through different magic runes. He notes that if he activates magic using the method from the game, the activation will will be fast and the power tremendous. But the drawback is that it's difficult to control the power, and Kyle Salterian doesn't know why the game method makes magic more powerful. Thinking hard on this and not getting any ideas, he throws the book away, deciding to seal it for now. Sitting cross-legged among a pile of books, Kyle Salterian knows there will be a time when he has to show off his magic and can't just stick to using standard magic. The magic activation method in this world is slow, but the advantage is detailed power control. Kyle Salterian suddenly thinks about combining the world's magic activation method with the game's user-friendly method, taking the best of both. Suddenly, the system issues a warning of danger, notifying that a magic explosion can occur this way, and asks Kyle Salterian if he wants to continue. Startled, Kyle Salterian recoils in fear. He rereads the warning and wonders what the system means by continue. Does it mean combining them is possible but risky? Although it's a warning window, Kyle Salterian remembers the saying, high risk, high rewards, and presses yes. At once, a burst of mana and energy swirls around Kyle Salterian, causing papers and parchments to fly everywhere. The system begins combining the two methods, issuing more warnings about possible explosions. Looking excited, Kyle Salterian agrees to continue. The system analyzes Kyle Salterian's body and the activation methods, diving into his memories of reading books and using magic missile. The combined path analysis becomes complete as Kyle Salterian's eyes widen in surprise. He exclaims in awe that he did it. He successfully developed a new kind of magic. Raising his hand, Kyle Salterian summons a magic missile using the combined activation method he just developed. Now able to fully control the technique, he calls it awesome and decides to try combining further. While experimenting, Kyle Salterian receives a similar warning from the system but mistakenly messes up a step. Passing by Kyle Salterian's room, Urgel gets startled by a sudden explosion. She rushes inside, calling out for Kyle Salterian and asking if he's okay. Groaning, Kyle Salterian assures her that he's fine. With a mischievous laugh, Kyle Salterian admits he was practicing magic, sitting among rubble and smoke with a large hole in the wall. Urgel asks what kind of magic he was practicing and points out the destroyed wall. Kyle Salterian admits he should have done this experiment outside. He wonders about the system's warnings and decides he needs a proper magic workshop with barriers next time. Hearing the loud explosion, Leonhardt comes running, shocked to see the state of the wall and the damage. Kyle Salterian asks Leonhardt and Urgel to help him clean up the mess. In the kitchen, Urgel is preparing a meal for Kyle Salterian, noticing something off in the taste while examining it. The usual stew is shimmering inside the pot. Urgel thinks the flavor of the stew today is a bit plain. Lost in thought, she wonders what she can do when someone calls out to her from behind. The blue-haired maid stands behind Urgel, praising her for being diligent every day. Her name is Daisy, and she gives a kind smile to Urgel. However, Urgel doesn't speak or return the smile to Daisy. She turns around, plainly stating that it's her job to do so. Daisy suggests Urgel add a dash of nutmeg if the stew's seasoning feels off. Daisy explains that it's an ingredient that brings out a rich umami flavor and assures Urgel to trust her. Though a little suspicious of Daisy, Urgel follows her advice and adds the nutmeg to the stew. She then takes some stew out, tastes it, and exclaims that it's delicious. Urgel continues staring at Daisy and asks if she's really good at cooking. She also asks Daisy if she can teach her a little. Daisy smiles and agrees to teach and help Urgel, starting with helping her carry the food. Loaded with the meal, Daisy and Urgel push the food wheel towards Kyle Salterian's room. On the way, Daisy asks how Kyle Salterian is these days, claiming she's heard he's become polite. Daisy says she was initially worried for Urgel when she became Kyle Salterian's exclusive maid, as Kyle Salterian was known to cause trouble. Urgel replies that Kyle Salterian treats her well. Daisy then says she heard Kyle Salterian has also become more dignified lately, getting up, exercising, and even studying. Urgel becomes cautious at such questions from Daisy, and thinking carefully, she affirms that Kyle Salterian is very diligent. She also agrees that Kyle Salterian is studying very hard. Once she reaches the room, Urgel tells Kyle Salterian everything about Daisy and her asking questions about him. Urgel also informs him that Daisy asked what Kyle Salterian has been doing lately and who he's been meeting. Urgel claims she responded to these questions by saying she didn't know, so as not to reveal anything about Kyle Salterian. She asks if she responded correctly, and Kyle Salterian, with a smile, praises her, saying she did great. Kyle Salterian also suggests Urgel answer moderately in the future, and Urgel agrees to keep that in mind. Thinking about what Urgel said about Daisy wanting to know about him, Kyle Salterian realizes he's already being followed. With a smirk, he notes that it's expected from his second brother, Adolf Salterian, who lacks patience. It becomes obvious to Kyle Salterian that Adolf Salterian is rushing things. That night, Leonhardt informs Remtun Salterian about Kyle overcoming Hermamu, and hearing this, Salterian is completely bewildered and shocked. Leonhardt affirms it's true and that Kyle is already starting to study his own magic. He also reveals that Kyle has already achieved the first circle. However, Leonhardt decides not to reveal that Kyle's power is already beyond the first circle. Meanwhile, Salterian is still shaken to learn that Kyle actually overcame Hermimu. He recalls how Kyle's condition used to be terrible and how he was harsh with him, such that Kyle would say he didn't ask to be born with such a weak body. Kyle would get fed up with being treated like vermin and speak rudely to Salterian, causing Salterian to get angry, disown Kyle, and order him to stay locked in his room at all times. Remembering such events, Salterian begins feeling guilty and sorry, and his lips tremble slightly in grief. He points out that Kyle recently turned 13, and to overcome Hermimu, one needs exceptional talent in magic or swordsmanship. Usually, that talent manifests around the age of 5 or 6, but for someone like Kyle, Salterian questions whether there have been any cases of overcoming Hermimu at the late age of 13. Leonhardt says he isn't aware of any such occurrences, but he once again confirms that Kyle Salterian overcame Hermimu as he saw him using the first magic circle. Salterian remains silent, wondering if this miracle really happened. He then asks Leonhardt if he should meet Kyle or not, unsure of what to do due to his past treatment of him. He assumes Kyle must still resent him. Hearing Salterian talk about resentment, Leonhardt disagrees. On the contrary, he claims Kyle said something about wanting to talk to Salterian. Leonhardt recalls that a few days ago, Kyle had told him about wanting to meet Salterian in person. Leonhardt had reminded Kyle that he's still under house arrest and cannot leave the annex, and Kyle acknowledged he knew that. Kyle had then requested Leonhardt to let his father know he wanted to see him. He had even joined his hands and begged Leonhardt to do this for him. Right then, Leonhardt realized that Kyle didn't seem to harbor resentment towards Salterian. In the present, Salterian impatiently asks Leonhardt what exactly his son said about him. Clearing his throat, Leonhardt notes that Kyle wants to meet Salterian in person. Salterian, the head of the prestigious swordsmanship family, Salterian Marquis, has protected the family from monsters for generations. He is one of the 5 sword masters on the continent. He is also the father of Kyle Salterian. Standing in the corridor, Kyle Salterian looks up at a large portrait of his father hung on the wall. Out of nowhere, Kyle Salterian's hand begins to tremble, and he is unable to control it. Clenching his fist, Kyle Salterian remembers how his father used to treat him, and feelings of fear and resentment resurface. When he was younger, Salterian would scold Kyle for not being able to lift his sword and would call him out. On his knees and trembling in fear, Kyle would wail and cry that he couldn't do it. He would complain that it was too difficult, making Salterian extremely angry. Salterian would go all out and give Kyle a harsh scolding, disgracing him and saying he was of no use to the family. Hearing such words from his father, Kyle would completely break down, losing his will and confidence, feeling utterly useless. He would scream for his father not to abandon him. These memories flood Kyle Salterian's mind as he looks at his father's portrait. He places a hand on his heart, feeling it beat rapidly, and sighs. He feels strange, though these memories aren't really his. They feel as if they are. It's as if the souls of Lee Hyunwoo, the protagonist, and Kyle Salterian have merged into one. But if one thing has changed, it's that the current Kyle Salterian is no longer the coward he once was. Now, Kyle Salterian is both himself and Lee Hyunwoo. As an adult, Kyle Salterian vows to prove his worth to Salterian. Later that day, Salterian and Kyle Salterian come face to face, both staring into each other's eyes. Salterian breaks the silence, asking if Kyle has something to say, which Kyle affirms, addressing him by his first name. Hearing Kyle call him by his first name instead of father, Salterian is taken aback. Tapping the table, Salterian notes that he instructed Kyle not to leave his room without permission. He also points out that, though he has allowed Kyle to use the library for studying, if he causes any more trouble, the consequences will be severe. Saying this, Salterian asks Kyle if he understands. Kyle remains silent, realizing that Salterian doesn't trust him at all. Salterian, being one of the 5 sword masters on the continent, makes Kyle try to gather more information using insight, but Kyle fails. Having no choice but to negotiate, Kyle says he understands, and so why he formally requested this meeting. In the past, Kyle would have argued back, but seeing him agree now, Salterian is surprised, wondering if Kyle Kyle has truly grown up. Kyle admits that he's grown up, takes responsibility for his past mistakes, and accepts all the blame. Bowing lightly, Kyle also says he deeply regrets everything and promises to change. Remton Seltarian is baffled, standing abruptly, unable to believe that Kyle is actually apologizing. Kyle then points out that he has one more thing. He wants to make a deal with Remton Seltarian. Remton Seltarian asks what kind of deal, and Kyle confirms if he has heard about him overcoming Hermimum. Remton Seltarian confirms he has, and Kyle also confirms that it's true. To demonstrate, Kyle raises his hand and summons a fireball, saying he is now a first circle mage. Shaken, Remton Seltarian stands watching Kyle's magic in silence. Now seeing the proof with his own eyes, Remton Seltarian is speechless. Kyle continues producing the flames hovering above his palm. Remton Seltarian admits he can sense the flow of mana from Kyle, as Kyle claims he will continue to grow stronger. Mages who overcome Hermimum are known for exceptional potential. Kyle believes it might be why it only took him a few days to achieve the first circle. The value of a great mage is said to be equivalent to an entire knight order. Though Remton Seltarian is renowned for swordsmanship, Kyle asks if it wouldn't be great to have an outstanding mage among the direct descendants. Kyle points out that if the family supports him to grow as a mage, he will contribute his abilities and be a great asset to the family. With the Seltarian Marquis possessing both swordsmanship and magic, the family would stand tall above others. After saying all this, Kyle asks Remton Seltarian what he thinks, noting that this deal benefits both sides. Kyle requests that Remton Seltarian invest in him, a truly capable talent. In life, it's give and take. The fastest way to gain favor is to show what you can offer in return. Remton Seltarian values the family's benefits and honor above all, and simply appealing to family ties won't persuade him. Sometimes one must make ruthless decisions for the family's sake. Kyle previously tried to attract his father's attention by causing trouble, thinking Remton Seltarian was indifferent, but such methods only backfired. However, when mutual interests align, even bad relationships can improve. Kyle notes that this is how adults handle things, which he is now doing. Seeing Kyle's newfound confidence, Remton Seltarian doesn't have the guts to directly reject the offer. He wonders if this is the same Kyle he once knew. No, this is not the same scared and bratty child as before. Kyle Seltarian presents his deal, asking Remton Seltarian to consider investing in him, a capable talent. Remton Seltarian silently glares at Kyle Seltarian without responding. Many thoughts run wild in his mind as he grapples with the changed Kyle Seltarian before him. He realizes that Kyle Seltarian is trying to negotiate by offering something the opponent needs to achieve his desires. It's difficult for Remton Seltarian to accept that the once tantrum-throwing child is now negotiating like this. The child he thought was a failure is now standing before him, remarkably grown up. Deciding to recognize Kyle Seltarian as a valuable asset, Remton Seltarian finally agrees to provide the necessary funds and magic stones for his studies. Remton Seltarian tells Kyle Seltarian to do his best and prove his worth. Kyle Seltarian smiles and promises to live up to Remton Seltarian's expectations. A few days later, Leonhardt and Urgel are surprised as Kyle Seltarian asks for their opinion on something. Kyle Seltarian has finished building his new magic workshop and is showing it to them. He explains that the interior is reinforced with barrier magic and artifacts, equipped for making potions and artifacts. Confidently, Kyle Seltarian says there won't be any more holes in the walls now. Looking around, Leonhardt exclaims how amazing the place is and asks where Kyle got the money to create it, to which Kyle Seltarian replies that his father provided some. Kyle Seltarian adds that he used a bit of charm, and his father fell into his trap, providing the resources. Kyle Seltarian calls Urgel over to show her something, moving towards a nearby door. Urgel follows Kyle Seltarian into a different room, which he prepared for her to use spirit magic freely. He points out that the room is soundproof and dustproof, so Urgel can practice without worry. Pleased, Urgel asks if she can really use this room, and Kyle Seltarian affirms she can, as much as she likes. Kyle Seltarian reminds Urgel that he wants her to become his trusted aide. He doesn't want her to only be the maid who serves, but also to grow into a powerful spirit mage. Touched, Urgel bows and begins crying, promising to work hard. She vows to learn diligently and be a great help to Kyle Seltarian in the future, and her favorability towards him rises to 70. Kyle Seltarian smiles at Urgel, affirming her determination. Suddenly, crystals on nearby shelves begin glowing and emitting bright light. Startled, Kyle Seltarian and Urgel turn to see the new development. Kyle Seltarian asks why the spirit magic circle is reacting suddenly and if Urgel used spirit magic, but she denies it. As the light intensifies, Kyle Seltarian looks up at the ceiling, seeing light float. The light continues to intensify, and from it, a winged creature emerges, which Kyle Seltarian Saltirian thinks is a spirit summoning. The summoned spirit flies down and lunges at Urgel, who extends her hands to catch it. As the spirit clings to Urgel, Kyle Saltirian realizes she must have summoned it unknowingly. Kyle Saltirian praises her for summoning a spirit, but Urgel claims she did nothing. Kyle Saltirian explains that spirit magic involves feeling the spirit's energy in nature with your soul, not casting spells or incantations. When Urgel's emotions heightened, the spirit stones in the workshop responded, summoning the spirit. Urgel, still puzzled, stares at the spirit. Kyle Saltirian then points out that the spirit stones have all disappeared, and Urgel asks if she really used them. Kyle Saltirian hadn't expected Urgel to summon a spirit so quickly. Wondering what kind of spirit it is, Kyle Saltirian tries to use insight, but it doesn't work. He asks Urgel if she knows what the spirit is, and Urgel asks the spirit, which begins explaining. Urgel listens and then reveals that the spirit is Ashiris, an ancient spirit of light. Kyle Saltirian is bewildered, wondering how the little chubby spirit could be an ancient spirit of light. Ancient spirits are so rare that top-level spirit mages can only summon one after exhausting all their resources, but Urgel did it unconsciously. Kyle Saltirian adds that the spirit seems too trivial for an ancient spirit, as the spirit lunges at him, while Urgel says it's not in its true form. Urgel notes that if the spirit transformed into its true form, the mansion would collapse. After being hit, Kyle Saltirian massages his head in pain, while the spirit tells Urgel something surprising. Urgel says the spirit wants to be her friend, and Kyle Saltirian explains that it's a contract. Urgel asks what type of contract, and Kyle Saltirian says the spirit must be highly compatible with her. Sounding uncertain, Urgel asks if accepting the contract is okay. The spirit makes a loud noise and leaps from Urgel's arms, causing a rune circle to appear on the floor, radiating bright light. Urgel, staring at the spirit, mutters that she will make a sincere contract with Ashiris, the ancient spirit of light. Ashiris's eyes blaze as Urgel acknowledges it as her summon and gives it a name. From the side, Kyle Saltirian suggests the name Padaki. The summon registers the name and asks for confirmation, which Kyle Saltirian provides. The name is registered, and Kyle Saltirian giggles silently. The summon opens its eyes and jumps at Urgel as she welcomes it, saying its name is Padaki, and she looks forward to working together. With a smile, Urgel thanks Padaki for becoming her friend. Padaki makes a noise of approval, happy to be with Urgel. Urgel hugs Padaki as Kyle Saltirian watches with a wide smile, satisfied with the progress. A few days later, placing down a cup of tea, someone apologizes for not paying Kyle Saltirian much attention lately. Sitting across from Adolf Saltirian, Kyle Saltirian says it's no big deal. Kyle Saltirian adds that he could have also approached Adolf Saltirian sooner, calling him brother. Filling Abel Saltirian's empty teacup, Urgel asks him if he needs anything else, and Kyle Saltirian tells her to go and rest. Urgel agrees to Kyle Saltirian's order and walks away, as Adolf Saltirian stares after her. Then turning to Kyle Saltirian, Adolf Saltirian asks if that child isn't the one he bought from the market and mentions she's pretty. Adolf Saltirian also claims he's looking for a new maid and asks Kyle Saltirian if he can send Urgel to him. Hearing this, Kyle Saltirian curses Adolf Saltirian in his mind, knowing that Adolf is present only because he heard the news about Kyle's healed Hermomu. Kyle Saltirian denies Adolf Saltirian's request and tells him to choose another maid other than Urgel. Now, Kyle Saltirian tries to defend his reason for needing Urgel, carefully choosing his words to avoid arousing any suspicions. Seeing Kyle Saltirian struggle to speak, Adolf Saltirian gives a laugh and claims he was just joking and he would never take Urgel away from Kyle Saltirian. Kyle Saltirian plays along and asks Adolf Saltirian to not tease him like that, claiming he was really startled while Adolf Saltirian roars with laughter. Adolf Saltirian decides to give up for now, as he can't afford to antagonize Kyle Saltirian yet. He thinks to himself that Kyle Saltirian is a lost cause, seeing him interested in women at such a young age, and believes it will be better to corrupt him towards darkness. Leaving these thoughts behind, Adolf Saltirian comments that Kyle Saltirian's body seems to have required quite a bit, to which Kyle replies that his Hermomu hasn't fully healed yet. Hearing this, Adolf Saltirian thinks for a moment and asks if it's true it's not fully healed, and Kyle Saltirian confirms it's an illness that takes time to heal. Kyle Saltirian tells Adolf Saltirian to look at something, gathering his attention. Producing a very small and weak fireball, Kyle Saltirian shows off, saying he can really cast magic. Showing it, Kyle Saltirian asks Adolf Saltirian what he thinks, while Adolf Salterian analyzes the situation carefully. Then he exclaims it's impressive that Kyle Salterian can create magic, as Kyle Salterian thanks him for the compliment. Now knowing Kyle Salterian's illness isn't fully cured and he's at the student level of first circle, Adolf Salterian is confident this won't affect the succession of the heir. But Daisy had told him that Kyle Salterian is very different and his magic skills are growing rapidly, so Adolf Salterian thinks Daisy must have exaggerated in her report. Nevertheless, Adolf Salterian thinks he still should remain cautious, though Kyle Salterian is just a 13-year-old and not worth worrying about. However, Adolf Salterian wonders if Kyle Salterian can be manipulated, then it will be worth it, and when he's useless, he can be thrown away. He then states that he will ask Kyle Salterian something directly. Saying so, he questions Kyle Salterian if he would like to join by his side. Hearing such a question, Kyle Salterian is taken aback, asking if Adolf Salterian is serious. Judging by the look on Adolf Salterian's face, he does seem serious. For a moment, neither brother speaks as they stare at each other. Kyle Salterian, meanwhile, seems pleased within, as if something he planned is going well, and he breaks the silence and says he will take permission from their father to join Adolf Salterian. After their meeting concludes, Adolf Salterian walks out of the room to see Leonhardt standing guard beside the door. Leonhardt bows and wishes Adolf Salterian a safe journey. Adolf Salterian, meanwhile, seems surprised to see Leonhardt there. He is aware of how Leonhardt is a tough nut to crack. Even though he's been coaxed, he hasn't switched sides. No matter, Adolf Salterian thinks it's good since Leonhardt hasn't joined Abel Salterian's side too. Adolf Salterian mocks Leonhardt, saying a darling of the knights like him is guarding a snot-nosed kid, and saying so, he walks away. Once Adolf Salterian leaves, Leonhardt turns around and walks into the room, where Kyle Salterian calls him over. Holding the cup of tea, Kyle Salterian says he just finished the discussion. He also reveals that Adolf Salterian told him to join the subjugation team. He adds that he'll likely be working with Viscount Jerome, one of Adolf Salterian's close aides, and that this mission will be his true test for Adolf. Hearing this information, Leonhardt is kind of surprised. He then says that if Kyle Salterian is joining the subjugation team, he will also join, but Kyle Salterian denies the request. Kyle Salterian explains that if Leonhardt is around him, it will make Adolf Salterian suspicious, while Leonhardt protests that it will be dangerous. Leonhardt also points out that it might be a trap, which Kyle Salterian agrees, but notes that he has to do this to make Adolf Salterian trust him. Kyle Salterian also admits that there's a chance Adolf Salterian will try to put him in danger. However, Kyle Salterian confidently states that he is capable of protecting himself, assuring Leonhardt. Kyle Salterian also claims that he won't reveal his abilities there. Explaining the plan, Kyle Salterian asks Leonhardt if he has heard of the Yorage function. In the south of Traston territory, there is a forest inhabited by a monster colony. The Salterian Marquis regularly sends subjugation teams to clear out the monsters in that area. Currently, Kyle Salterian has joined the subjugation team and is stationed there. A knight greets Kyle Salterian, introducing himself as Viscount Jerome. Viscount Jerome mentions that he has heard of Kyle Salterian from Adolf Salterian and notes that Kyle will be working with him on this team. Kyle Salterian tells Viscount Jerome that it's his first combat experience and requests that he take care of him, to which Viscount Jerome assures he will protect him. However, Kyle Salterian remains suspicious of Viscount Jerome. He notices that Viscount Jerome's favorability towards him is at -40. Therefore, Kyle Salterian decides to avoid Viscount Jerome for now and states that he will leave to prepare. Viscount Jerome tells him to let him know if he needs anything. As Kyle Salterian walks away, Viscount Jerome watches him with an unsettling intensity. Viscount Jerome is aware that Kyle Salterian is a first circle mage, and he has been ordered to keep an eye on him and ensure he doesn't die. He feels displeased with Adolf Salterian for assigning him such a difficult mission to protect a child during a subjugation, knowing this will be tough. Later that day, during the subjugation, Kyle Salterian raises his staff and summons lightning, which strikes a group of goblins, electrocuting them. Observing this, Viscount Jerome and the other men cheer and praise Kyle Salterian's skill and power. As Kyle Salterian continues to kill more goblins, Viscount Jerome's favorability towards him begins to rise. Clapping with delight, Viscount Jerome tells Kyle Salterian that he is amazing, and his favorability towards Kyle reaches 50. Looking innocent and gazing at Viscount Jerome, Kyle Salterian thinks he has never encountered such an easy target, as his favorability has jumped by 90 in one go. Viscount Jerome jumps in excitement, claiming that Adolf Salterian will be pleased to hear about Kyle Salterian's performance. With his first step a success, Kyle Salterian looks forward to advancing to the next part of his plan. It's nighttime, and the subjugation party is back at their camp, all seated outside around around a roaring campfire. They are celebrating with mugs of drinks for their victory as they make toasts for Kyle Salterian. Acting humble, Kyle Salterian says he's done nothing to deserve this praise, but Viscount Jerome disagrees and exclaims that Kyle's magic was impressive. The others join in, praising Kyle Salterian and his skills, especially considering how young he is. Moreover, they add that Kyle Salterian hasn't complained about the harsh camping food. Because of this, they tell Kyle Salterian he's very mature for his age. Kyle Salterian notes that his brother Adolf Salterian must have been in situations like this many times during his subjugations. He says that thinking about what his brother has accomplished, he couldn't just be a spoiled brat. At such mature words, Viscount Jerome and the others are all open-jawed in amazement. Viscount Jerome even starts tearing up, saying he didn't know Kyle Salterian admired Adolf Salterian so deeply. Touched by Kyle Salterian's speech, Viscount Jerome and the others agree to help him and look after him, with Viscount Jerome's favorability increasing to 60. Later that night, the campfire is extinguished and the men are fast asleep in the tents. Kyle Salterian tells a guard that he will take a walk before going to sleep, and the guard tells him not to go too far. Kyle Salterian walks away from the camp, glad that no one suspects him because he's just a child. The knights are all exhausted from the day's battle, and the sentries are few since they don't fear the goblins. However, ogres are different, and Kyle Salterian withdraws a vial containing ogre perfume, which can summon ogres within a 10-kilometer radius. A few days ago, Kyle Salterian had told Leonhardt about the ogre perfume, but Leonhardt hadn't heard of it before. This made Kyle Salterian think he must be the first to create it, and that this world might still be unaware of the recipe for ogre perfume. Kyle Salterian had explained to Leonhardt that the perfume could summon ogres within a radius, with the higher quality perfume covering a larger area. Leonhardt had warned that the subjugation team's target was the goblin colony, so they couldn't handle ogres, but Kyle Salterian had revealed that this was his plan. The subjugation team consisted of 12 expert knights who could easily manage goblins, but ogres were different. Kyle Salterian explained that the knights, loyal to Adolf Salterian, were street criminals turned legion members, brainwashed by Adolf Salterian into fanatics. Adolf Salterian had expanded his influence and proved his ability to lead even hopeless individuals through intense brainwashing. Currently, these men are controlled by Adolf Salterian, and if he makes a move during the succession ceremony, a tragedy could follow. To prevent this, Kyle Salterian planned to weaken the 5th Legion by having the 12 high-level knights fight against ogres and die. Kyle Salterian planned to be the only survivor from the subjugation party. At present, Kyle Salterian is about to put his plan into action, removing the cork from the ogre perfume, which spreads into the air. A large two-headed ogre nearby smells the perfume and goes berserk. It follows the scent and, along the way, discovers the camp, chasing after the knights. While the other knights run, one draws his sword to face the ogre. However, the ogre crushes the knight with a single thump of its large hand, terrifying the other knights. Seeing the expert knight so easily, the others realize they are doomed. They are so terrified that they can't even move. Right then, Kyle Salterian arrives and shouts for the knights to come to their senses and not act like cowards. Kyle Salterian warns that if they fall back, the ogres will enter human territory. He stresses the importance of stopping the ogres no matter what. Motivated by Kyle Salterian's words, the knights agree to follow him into battle. Right then, Viscount Jerome arrives on horseback and is relieved to see Kyle Salterian alive. Viscount Jerome assures Kyle Salterian that he'll handle the ogre and tells him to hide somewhere safe. But having his own plan, Kyle Salterian protests that he won't run away. Kyle Salterian declares that he'll fight until the end, noting that Adolf Salterian wouldn't like it if he abandoned his men and ran. Kyle Salterian asks Viscount Jerome if this isn't true, and Viscount Jerome is even more impressed. Kyle Salterian raises his hand and casts a haste spell on Viscount Jerome. Viscount Jerome instantly feels the effect, his body feeling lighter. Kyle Salterian points out that he's only a first circle mage, so he'll act as support while Viscount Jerome leads the charge. Viscount Jerome agrees, drawing his sword, thinking that Kyle Salterian is brave for standing on the battlefield like this, and resolving to tell Adolf Salterian. Viscount Jerome dismounts, raising his sword, which becomes engulfed in powerful energy, its aura cracking the ground beneath him. Eyes blazing, Viscount Jerome dares the ogre to fight and charges at it. The other knights watch in anticipation as Viscount Jerome faces the ogre alone. Witnessing this, they also decide not to back down and join Viscount Jerome in the battle. Staying back as support, Kyle Salterian tells the knights to give it their all. Drawing their swords, the knights move forward to confront the ogre. Kyle Salterian, after summoning the ogre, is pleased that his plan is going well. He is satisfied with the ogre perfume, as it works well and even summons dangerous variants of ogres, and he shouts out for the knights to fight. The ogre swings its arm, instantly one one of the knights charging at it. Letting out a battle cry, Viscount Jerome runs at the ogre, his glowing sword raised before him. He bellows that he is a match for the ogre and calls it toward him. Already half covered in blood, the ogre turns its head to look at Viscount Jerome. Right then, Viscount Jerome swings his sword and strikes the ogre from behind before it can react. Seeing Viscount Jerome fight so valiantly, the other knights watch while holding their breath. Now, half of the knights out of those 12 in the subjugation party are already gone. A scared-looking knight, trembling in fear, notes that the ogre is too strong and they might not survive. Kyle Salterian, who planned all this, wants exactly this: all the knights dead. These vermin knights are tainted by darkness, so they deserve no less than death, which the ogre will deliver. Viscount Jerome is struggling to even hurt the ogre. Noticing that out of the 12 knights, only 3 remain, he begins doubting if they can actually win. Clutching his sword tight, he wonders if he should use his last resort. However, he isn't sure, as he has gained the power of darkness and become much stronger. But Adolf had warned him that if he unleashed that power fully, he wouldn't be able to return to his original form. Adolf had told him that if that happened, Viscount Jerome would become a monster without humanity, so he should never unleash that power recklessly. Now, in a life and death situation, Viscount Jerome has no choice but to take that path. The only way he can defeat the ogre, even if it means going on a rampage. The ogre is still standing tall, unhurt, so Viscount Jerome thinks going on a never-ending rampage is better than dying. Right then, a massive bolt of lightning descends from the sky upon the ogre, startling Viscount Jerome. He realizes Kyle Salterian just used his magic to attack the ogre. Looking down from the nearby cliff, Kyle Salterian states he will provide magical protection and tells Viscount Jerome to delve deeper into the battle. Now, much relieved, Viscount Jerome feels confident that with Kyle Salterian's help, they might win. So, he decides to delay going berserk and wait for the right moment. Kyle Salterian uses the mental cleaning spell on all the people there. Affected by the spell, Viscount Jerome and the other people feel a surge of energy, their minds cleared. They now gain high morale and remind themselves that they are under the 5th Legion commanded by Adolf, raising their weapons to charge once again at the ogre. One of the knights lunges forward and strikes the ogre's right head with a powerful blow. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian, still standing on the cliff, watches the battle unfold below. He begins counting the remaining knights backward as they are killed one by one. The ogre turns here and there, searching for surviving knights. Spotting one trying to flee, it grabs that knight and smashes him against a nearby wall, right in front of Viscount Jerome's eyes. Now, only Viscount Jerome remains as Kyle Salterian's count reaches 1. Kyle Salterian's priority is eliminating the 12 knights empowered by Adolf, and now with 11 down, only Viscount Jerome is left. Looking around at his dead comrades, Viscount Jerome declares that their sacrifice won't be in vain, and he asks Kyle Salterian for another spell to help him finish off the ogre. Smirking, Kyle Salterian declares that it's time and raises his hand to cast the spell. Using the ensnare spell, Kyle Salterian causes numerous dark hands to emerge around Viscount Jerome, holding him from all sides. With this sudden event, Viscount Jerome is completely taken aback, realizing he can't move. He tries to free himself, groaning desperately while Kyle Salterian watches in silence. Kyle Salterian tells Viscount Jerome to keep his eyes forward. As Viscount Jerome remains immobile, the ogre approaches, ready to finish him off. Seeing the ogre right in front of him, Viscount Jerome tries his best to move, but still can't. The ogre raises its massive hand to crush Viscount Jerome, prompting him to let out a terrified scream. The others watching in horror see Viscount Jerome get killed, their eyes widening in shock, sweat dripping from their faces. They can't believe even Viscount Jerome is gone. Now, they accept that they are all going to die, and there's nothing they can do. They begin shouting that they will die just like Viscount Jerome. However, right at that moment, another powerful bolt of lightning and fire strikes directly on top of the ogre. The ogre lets out a growl of pain as the men watch with their jaws wide open. Burnt like coal, the ogre collapses, slamming face first onto the ground. Stepping onto the ogre's dead body, Kyle Salterian declares that it's over. The men are surprised to see Kyle Salterian there. Upon killing the ogre, Kyle Salterian receives a high-grade inner core as well. With the job done, Kyle Salterian decides to wrap things up, announcing to everyone that the ogre is dead thanks to Viscount Jerome's sacrifice and timing. He adds that this victory belongs to the 12 knights and to everyone who fought without regard for their own lives. He declares that the victory is for all of them, shouting that they did it together. The men remain silent after such a speech. Then, they also join the celebration, cheering alongside Kyle Salterian, raising their fists and shouting that they did it. They also chant Kyle Salterian's name, hailing him. The result of the subjugation was successful and all the alive members returned back to the city. During the subjugation, the mutant two-headed ogre and a goblin den was wiped out. However, there were also significant losses, many and some were injured. Once Kyle Salterian and the others reached the city gates, Adolf Salterian, waiting for them worriedly, asks Kyle if Viscount Jerome really died. Sounding sad and sorry, Kyle Salterian confirms that Viscount Jerome really did die while fighting a fierce mutant ogre. Adolf Salterian rushes towards the cart and pulls the white cloak off the body, receiving a shock. Seeing the lifeless body of Viscount Jerome laid on the cart, Adolf Salterian realizes he really died. He wonders if Viscount Jerome might not have got an opportunity to use the dark power, and he feels that losing him and the other knights is a huge blow, but he's also aware that there's nothing he can do about it now. Kyle Salterian fakes a cry, and Adolf Salterian turns to him and says he's relieved to see him return safely. Adolf Salterian also adds that defeating the ogre was Kyle Salterian's achievement, and he pats Kyle Salterian on his head and says he will inform their father so Kyle Salterian gets properly honored. Kyle Salterian gives a smile and thanks Adolf Salterian. Turning around, Adolf Salterian wipes the smile off his face, and as he walks back into the city, he is wearing a grim expression on his face. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian is relieved that he successfully managed to deceive Adolf Salterian quite well. Later that night, back in his mansion, after relaying everything to Urgel and Leonhardt, Kyle Salterian notes that he killed two birds with one stone by defeating the 5th Legion, gaining recognition from Adolf Salterian, and obtaining the ogre's core. Leonhardt says though it was dangerous, he's glad Kyle Salterian returned safely. Kyle Salterian claims the mutant ogre wasn't a big deal and that he could have defeated it alone, but he was merely pretending to be weak. Leonhardt asks Kyle Salterian if he plans to join Adolf Salterian's side now, and what about Abel Salterian? With a smile, Kyle Salterian lets Padaki fly towards Urgel, as he tells Leonhardt to just wait and watch what he does. Confidently, Kyle Salterian claims that Abel Salterian will come looking for him soon instead. A few days later, all high-ranking officials are gathered and seated at the table in Salterian's conference room. Adolf Salterian and Abel Salterian are both there as Remtun Salterian tells the council that they will review the expedition results and decide on the distribution of the spoils. He also announces that they will discuss Kyle Salterian's contributions, which were crucial in defeating the mutant ogre. If anyone has objections, Remtun Salterian suggests they speak up. Some of the members there are surprised to hear Kyle Salterian actually contributed while Adolf Salterian looks pleased. One man, Baron Hemington, addresses Remtun Salterian and asks if it isn't exaggerated to say that Kyle Salterian also played a significant role in the expedition. Remtun Salterian addresses Baron Hemington and asks what he means. Baron Hemington explains that though Remtun Salterian cherishes his youngest son and wants to praise him, Kyle Salterian is still a first circle wizard who just learned magic. Moreover, he adds that, considering all the problems Kyle Salterian has caused in the past, to say he contributed to the expedition simply for joining it is too much. He also notes that it's hard to believe Kyle Salterian could have matured so much overnight. Putting his views forth, Baron Hemington turns to the other members there, seeking their approval. Having listened to all this criticism, Kyle Salterian agrees that the fat man doesn't hesitate to speak in front of him. Kyle Salterian then speaks up and tells Baron Hemington he should be experienced in fighting a mutant ogre in person before making any judgments. Kyle Salterian points out that then it would be a good talk. Giving a smile, Kyle Salterian admits fighting the ogre is not as easy as it sounds, and notes that if Baron Hemington experiences it, he will understand. Being called out directly, Baron Hemington tries to argue back, but Abel Salterian cuts him off. Addressing him, Abel Salterian points out that even senior high-level knights would struggle to defeat an ogre, and fighting a mutant ogre and returning alive is almost a miracle. Seeing Abel Salterian step in, Kyle is surprised as Abel remarks that Kyle is alive only because the knights sacrificed their lives to protect him. He also adds that the last blow that killed the ogre was Kyle Salterian's magic, as confirmed by the testimonies of the surviving knights. Being countered like this, Baron Hemington still tries to reason, but someone shouts out telling him it's enough. Adolf Salterian, who just shouted out, pounces angrily on the table and asks Baron Hemington how dare he criticize Kyle Salterian, the direct heir of the Marquis family. Adolf Salterian asks Baron Hemington if he is trying to overstep his bounds, and Baron Hemington, seeming scared, says he would never dare. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian, seeing his brothers step up for him, is bewildered, finding it hard to see everyone praising him. Clearing his throat, Adolf Salterian turns to Remtun Salterian and says he agrees that Kyle Salterian's achievement achievements should be evaluated properly. He confirms that the 5th Legion testified to Kyle's bravery in battle, and Remton Selterian declares that with both Abel and Adolf Selterian's approval, there's no denying Kyle's achievements. So as a reward, Remton Selterian declares that starting from today, all probation on Kyle Selterian will be lifted. Kyle Selterian looks super pleased as Remton Selterian notes that Kyle Selterian will be allowed free access to the main residence and permitted to go out. Remton Selterian also declares that the spoils of the ogre will be distributed based on contributions, so Kyle Selterian won't receive any spoils. With this, Remton Selterian dismisses the meeting, leaving Kyle Selterian not pleased as he won't get any spoils. Before Remton Selterian can leave, Kyle Selterian calls out to him, asking him to wait, and he asks if he's really not getting anything. Remton Selterian leans closer to Kyle Selterian and whispers that Kyle Selterian has already kept the ogre core. Realizing his father is aware of the core, Kyle Selterian is speechless, so he agrees not to take any spoils. As Kyle Selterian is about to leave, Adolf Selterian calls out to him from behind. Kyle Selterian turns to face Adolf Selterian as Adolf asks if he's realized that he kept his promise to inform their father of Kyle's achievements. Adolf Selterian also points out that he cares very much for Kyle Selterian. Abel Selterian watches from afar, seeing Kyle Selterian and Adolf Selterian engaged in conversation and both laughing. He admits that Kyle Selterian has really changed, and he decides that he will need to have a talk with Kyle Selterian. Abel Selterian goes to see Kyle Selterian over tea and, sitting before him, tells him he has a trivial skill. He also notes that Kyle Selterian is the first one to hear about it, and not even their father knows about that. Sitting across the table, Kyle Selterian smiles and thinks it's crazy that Abel is suddenly sharing secrets with him. He had been anticipating for a while for Abel Selterian to find him, and now that time has come. After the previous meeting, Abel Selterian had called Kyle Selterian aside and praised him for his great performance in the battle. Abel Selterian praised Kyle Selterian for successfully handling a real fight, calling him a respectable wizard, but Kyle noted that he's still a first circle, meaning he has a long way to go. Abel Selterian asked Kyle if he had time to chat before dinner, as he wanted to hear the details of Kyle's achievements in the expedition. Kyle Selterian had smiled and agreed to chat with Abel Selterian, telling him to visit anytime. So right now, based on that conversation, Abel Selterian has come to visit Kyle Selterian. Kyle Selterian was suspicious from the start that Abel Selterian had a different motive, but now, seeing him reveal secrets, Kyle Selterian is indeed taken aback. Anyway, Kyle Selterian is certain Abel Selterian's ultimate goal is to recruit him and strengthen his position to overcome the Selterian Marquis rebellion created by Adolf Selterian. Kyle Selterian knows that he can only survive in this game with the support of the Selterian Marquis family, so he has to choose his words carefully. So he tells Abel Selterian that if he's about to relay a secret their father doesn't even know, it would be better if he doesn't either. Abel Selterian asks Kyle Selterian if he doesn't want to hear it, and Kyle Selterian says it's not like that. Kyle Selterian points out that he's just scared of what Abel Selterian might want from him after revealing such a big secret. Hearing this from Kyle Selterian, Abel Selterian remains silent and says that's mean of Kyle Selterian, and he asks how Kyle Selterian can think he would want something from his brother. Giving a nervous smile, Kyle Selterian exclaims that it's as expected of Abel Selterian, and then placing the cup down, suggests they become straightforward now. Kyle Selterian then reveals that, though he is by Adolf Selterian's side currently, he doesn't support him in any way. However, Kyle Selterian also makes it clear that he's also not planning to join Abel Selterian's side either. It's nighttime, and what looks like a training area, set with dummy targets and weapons, sits in eternal darkness. The maid, Daisy, is there, apparently watching something. The air is filled with swooshing and slashing noises as Adolf Selterian, his eyes bloodlust, is cutting through the training dummies, as if releasing all his anger. Chopped in half, the training dummy rolls onto the ground and stops before Daisy's feet. Adolf Selterian asks if Abel Selterian visited Kyle Selterian, which Daisy confirms. Taking a towel, Adolf Selterian says he is aware of what Abel Selterian must have told Kyle Selterian, and as he wipes the sweat off his face, he reveals he had his eyes on Kyle Selterian first. He also notes that if Kyle Selterian joins Abel Selterian's side, he will have Kyle Selterian poisoned or something, and for that, he claims he placed Daisy there. Though in an unsure tone, Daisy agrees to Adolf Selterian's instructions. Meanwhile, back inside the mansion, Abel Selterian and Kyle Selterian are continuing their chat. Abel Selterian asks Kyle Selterian if he wants to hear the reason why he is revealing his secrets. Abel Selterian is right about to say the reason when suddenly Kyle Selterian shouts out that Abel Selterian is kind. Abel Selterian is taken aback at being called kind. Kyle Selterian activates insight and tries to learn more of Abel Saltarian's talents and traits, but the system is unable to do so. However, Kyle Saltarian does notice that Abel Saltarian's favorability for him is 0. Covering his face, Kyle Saltarian starts shouting that Abel Saltarian is a really good person, making Abel uncomfortable and confused about Kyle's behavior. Abel Saltarian thanks Kyle for considering him a good person and apologizes for not being there for him as a big brother in the past. Kyle Saltarian assures Abel not to apologize, claiming that if he had a younger brother like himself, he would have buried him, so he's glad Abel hasn't done that to him. Not sure what to make of Kyle Saltarian's comments, Abel Saltarian smiles and notes that Kyle Saltarian is really good at making jokes. Abel Saltarian admits that if he had known Kyle Saltarian was such a witty younger sibling, he would have connected with him sooner. Saying so, Abel Saltarian gets to the point and informs Kyle Saltarian that he can offer him everything that Adolf Saltarian promised, maybe even better. He then asks Kyle Saltarian if there's any room for consideration, and Kyle Saltarian says he's just indulging the kind-hearted eldest brother. Kyle Saltarian points out that Abel Saltarian would not simply try to kill him for joining the other side, but notes that Adolf Saltarian is different with a cruel nature. Kyle Saltarian admits that if he became a hindrance to Adolf Saltarian, Adolf would use any means necessary to remove him from his path. Since he's still a first circle wizard, Kyle Saltarian says he lacks the strength to protect himself, so if Adolf Saltarian targets him, he will be in trouble. Hearing this, Abel Saltarian remains silent. Then he says that Kyle Saltarian is the only one in this family who has given such an extreme assessment of Adolf Saltarian. Kyle Saltarian notes that Abel Saltarian didn't refute his evaluation and asks if he agrees with the opinions he gave. Abel Saltarian firmly agrees he agrees with Kyle Saltarian's thoughts. Then Abel Saltarian suggests they go back to the first thing he said, and he reveals that his secret, the trivial skill he has, is good intuition. Abel Saltarian explains that since he was young, he always had a bad feeling before something bad happened, and following that intuition helped him avoid it. He adds that as the succession ceremony is approaching, his bad premonitions are growing stronger, and he senses a dangerous aura from Adolf Saltarian. Kyle Saltarian, who knows the future from having played this game, thinks to himself that Abel Saltarian is actually correct. Such intuition is a low-level form of precognition, and since Abel Saltarian can also detect dark powers as well, it's surprising, as he didn't have such abilities in the game. So Kyle Saltarian wonders if it could be that when he entered the game, he caused something to stir, and it made other NPCs undergo changes they didn't have before. Abel Saltarian points out that Adolf Saltarian is still his biological brother and the second direct heir to the Marquis family, so he wants to keep Adolf in check. For this very reason, Abel Saltarian claims he kept this a secret. Kyle Saltarian says that the day Adolf Saltarian becomes the successor, the Saltarian Marquis family will be doomed. He also claims that everyone, including himself, won't be safe. Hearing this, Abel Saltarian is surprised that Kyle Saltarian actually believes him, so he asks what Kyle Saltarian is planning to do. Kyle Saltarian reveals he will join Adolf Saltarian's side and keep an eye on him, and when he has his guard down, strike him hard. Abel Saltarian asks Kyle if he plans to strike Adolf Saltarian from behind, and Kyle replies that if Abel helps him, they can easily bring Adolf down. Saying so, Kyle Saltarian extends his hand towards Abel Saltarian, asking if he will help him. Abel Saltarian thinks for a moment and says, as the eldest brother, he can't refuse Kyle Saltarian's request and agrees to support him. However, Kyle Saltarian sets a condition that Abel Saltarian has to do something for him first. A few days later, someone exclaims upon seeing a handful of platinum coins, claiming just one of them is worth several times their salary. It's Leonhardt, who looks down open-jawed at the coins, asking Kyle Saltarian where they came from. Kyle Saltarian explains that he got these coins from his eldest brother, Abel Saltarian. He claims that he originally intended to borrow just a little, but Abel Saltarian offered to give him as much as he needed without needing repayment. Exclaiming with pleasure, Kyle Saltarian says he never knew Abel Saltarian would be so generous. Leonhardt's eyes catch something, a crystal ball of some kind, and he asks about it. Kyle Saltarian says it's a personal communicator that allows him to contact Abel Saltarian. Leonhardt mentions that these communicators are really expensive, probably more than this mansion, to which Kyle Saltarian claims he is aware. Kyle Saltarian points out that this communicator is a simplified version, which can only be used to communicate with Abel Saltarian. Leonhardt remains silent for a few seconds and says things must have gone well with Abel Saltarian, to which Kyle Salterian affirms, noting that Abel Salterian is very kind. Kyle Salterian then extends the pouch of coins to Leonhardt, telling him to hold on to it for later use. Leonhardt asks Kyle Salterian why he needs this much money since the workshop is already finished. Kyle Salterian says that he is going to make more money, and this will be his investment fund. Raising her staff with her eyes closed, Urgel commands the light to gather at the tip of her staff and brighten the surroundings. But instead of the staff lighting up, Padaki, the light spirit, begins glowing intensely, startling Urgel. She notes that she was trying to make the staff glow and asks why the spirit is glowing. Seeing Padaki sitting on Kyle Salterian's head, Urgel commands it to come to her, but Kyle Salterian assures her it's fine. Watching Kyle Salterian and Urgel fooling around, Leonhardt looks fed up. He asks Kyle Salterian why they are in a dungeon right now. Kyle Salterian says they are inside the dungeon because they walked into it, prompting Leonhardt to say that's not what he meant. He notes that they left the house saying they were visiting in Phelim, the neighboring estate, and after seeing the dungeon's entrance, they stopped on the way and entered it. Kyle Salterian says that because they noticed the dungeon on the way, he thought they could stop by and investigate. Sighing, Leonhardt suggests they get out of the dungeon now, as this isn't a place they should be in, but Kyle Salterian says they will explore it. Leonhardt warns that this dungeon is dangerous. He suggests Kyle Salterian think about the way they came and the monsters that were swarming at the entrance of the cave. Leonhardt reminds Kyle Salterian that the further in they go, the fewer monsters they encounter. This means, as Leonhardt claims, there must be a powerful boss deeper inside that the other monsters are avoiding. Leonhardt also points out that although he's been able to handle the monsters so far, they can't be sure how powerful the boss will be, so it's better to turn back. Kyle Salterian reveals that he is indeed targeting that boss. Shocked, Leonhardt calls out Kyle for lying to the house about visiting in Phelim, to which Kyle admits they were never going there. Kyle Salterian explains that he knew there was a dungeon on the way, so he headed in this direction. He also points out that if he had said they were going to a dungeon, the house wouldn't have given him permission, or else many knights would have accompanied them. Not just that, Adolf Salterian's spies would have followed them, and even Abel Salterian would have sent someone to help Kyle Salterian, which would have caused chaos. On top of all this, Kyle Salterian mentions that there's also an issue with Urgel. The spirit magic training Urgel is going through has to be a secret, and with more people, this could be exposed. And the main problem, Kyle Salterian says, is that with many people, the loot would have to be shared, meaning he would get less of it. Leonhardt notes that with just the three of them, it's reckless. Urgel has just begun her training. He's only a single knight, and while Kyle has reached the second circle, he's still an amateur. Turning his eyes to Leonhardt, Kyle Salterian assures him that just because he acts weak at home doesn't make him powerless. He also reminds Leonhardt that he saw the power of his magic a while ago, which is very different from regular magic. Leonhardt is lost for words as Kyle Salterian assures him the three of them are strong enough. They have Leonhardt, a tank, Urgel, a healer, and Kyle Salterian himself, a damage dealer, the perfect lineup. Kyle Salterian tells Leonhardt that he is strong enough and will only get stronger from here. Saying this, Kyle Salterian gives Leonhardt the choice to watch carefully and decide to whom he will be loyal, Kyle Salterian or his father, Remtun Salterian. Kyle Salterian adds that a knight with two masters isn't good, and says he wants a knight who is loyal to him alone. Leonhardt clenches tightly onto his sword and tries to say something, but no words come out. Kyle Salterian knows that Leonhardt is currently following his father's orders to guard him, meaning that despite Leonhardt's loyalty to him, his true allegiance lies with Remtun Salterian. To truly win over this rigid and loyal knight, simply showing his abilities won't be enough, and forcing his loyalty would only backfire. The fact that Leonhardt is hesitating right now is enough for Kyle Salterian, and he decides to wait when Leonhardt will truly recognize him and be loyal only to him as his impenetrable shield. After walking for quite a while inside the dungeon, Kyle Salterian and the two others finally reach the place where the master of the dungeon resides. It's the boss room. Sitting on the other side of the room, with a large hammer, stern body, and terrifying aura, is a minotaur in its sanctuary. Feeling intimidated by the minotaur, Urgel exclaims that it's huge. In the fantasy defense game, this dungeon used to be popular among beginners for farming, as there were no traps, the path was short, and there were few monsters. And most importantly, the rewards given were also very generous compared to its difficulty. Knowing what the treasures are, Kyle Salterian was never ready to share them with anyone, which is why he came alone. Leonhardt claims that this minotaur is said to be 3 times stronger than an ogre, and though it lacks magic, its brute strength is enough. Kyle Salterian begins planning, instructing Leonhardt to take the front line and get the minotaur's attention while he casts a shield to increase Leonhardt's defense. With Leonhardt's sword energy and his shield combined, Kyle Salterian's is confident Leonhardt can tank the minotaur's attacks. However, Kyle Salterian also warns Leonhardt to watch out when the Minotaur charges like a bull and starts a whirlwind attack. Dodging it is a must. The plan is for Leonhardt to lure the Minotaur to the outer edges, dodging as much as possible, and once the whirlwind stops, they can counterattack while it's exhausted. Listening to this plan, Leonhardt says he understands as Kyle Salterian tells Urgel to cast buffs on him and Leonhardt before the fight. Kyle Salterian assures Urgel she can hide and cast spells since it's her first battle, but Urgel disagrees, saying she didn't learn magic just to hide. Filled with confidence, she declares that she wants to help Kyle Salterian and show the results of her training. Looking at Urgel, Kyle Salterian smiles and says it's fine if she wants to help, but he also tells her not to overdo it and to keep her distance to avoid getting caught in the fight. He reminds her that she's the party healer and her most important role is, she finishes his sentence, saying it's to protect Kyle Salterian. Kyle Salterian corrects her, saying her most important role is to stay alive. He points out that as long as Urgel doesn't fall, they will always have a chance, and both his and Leonhardt's lives are in her hands. Patting her shoulders, Kyle Salterian tells her to keep herself safe as her top priority. Realizing the importance of her task, Urgel mutters that she understands, her cheeks going a little red. Meanwhile, Leonhardt, standing still and hearing all of Kyle Salterian's talk, remembers that this dungeon's location should have been unknown. Not only that, but the importance of a healer in battle, and even the strategy to defeat the Minotaur, are things one learns through real experience. So how does Kyle Salterian, who has been confined to the estate all his life, know this? So he tells Kyle Salterian he seems very familiar with dungeon strategies. Leonhardt points out that as far as he knows, this should be Kyle Salterian's first time in a dungeon, and Kyle Salterian now realizes he may have said too much. Trying to sound less suspicious, Kyle quickly claims he learned these strategies from a subjugation party, but Leonhardt, still unconvinced, asks how Kyle knew about the Minotaur's attack patterns. Unable to come up with good reasons, Kyle Salterian stutters, wondering why Leonhardt is asking so many questions. He becomes terrified, fearing that Leonhardt might know he's not the real Kyle Salterian. He imagines a scenario where Leonhardt tells everyone that he is an imposter, leading to his arrest. In his vision, Kyle Salterian sees himself tied up, with Leonhardt, Abel Salterian, and Adolf Salterian standing over him, ready to punish him. Scared beyond his wits, Kyle Salterian lets out a horrified scream. He doesn't want Leonhardt to discover he's an imposter, so he claims he learned about the Minotaur from a book he read. Leonhardt is still not satisfied with the explanation, so Kyle Salterian adds that he did spend a lot of time in the library, reading many books. He claims that during that time, he secretly read some military strategy books as well. Leonhardt stays silent for a moment, then smiles, finally buying Kyle Salterian's lie. Leaning down, Leonhardt praises Kyle Salterian for studying so hard and says he's impressed. Leonhardt also notes that Remton Salterian will be proud of Kyle Salterian for how much he's grown, and Urgel adds that Kyle Salterian is always cool. Relieved to have gotten out of the situation, Kyle Salterian notices that Urgel and Leonhardt's affection toward him has increased. Kyle Salterian now decides to be more careful and come up with good excuses for why he knows so much about this world in the future. Ready for the fight with the Minotaur, Urgel raises her staff and begins buffing Kyle Salterian and Leonhardt. She uses Light's empowerment and Light's healing. Hit by these spells, Kyle Salterian instantly feels his health and defense increase by 30%. He praises Urgel, saying the effect of her buffs is much stronger than before, causing her to blush. Now fully buffed, they turn to face the Minotaur, ready for battle. Meanwhile, the Minotaur is still resting at the other end of the hall. Kyle Salterian instructs Leonhardt to charge, and Leonhardt draws his blade and sprints toward the Minotaur. At full speed, Leonhardt charges straight at the Minotaur. Sensing Leonhardt, the Minotaur snaps its glowing eyes open and swings its hammer to block the attack. The Minotaur now stands up to its full height, towering over Leonhardt. Leonhardt notes that with Kyle Salterian's shield and Urgel's buffs, his body feels completely different. He feels sturdier and much lighter than before. The Minotaur bellows, asking who dares disturb its slumber and try to steal its treasure. It roars that it won't forgive anyone who dares to take its treasure when suddenly an attack hits it right in the face. Angered even more, the Minotaur demands to know what just happened. Kyle Salterian, having launched a magical attack at the Minotaur, smirks. He tells the Minotaur that they are dungeon thieves. Then he fires more attacks at the Minotaur, who blocks them with its massive hammer. Snarling in rage, the Minotaur tries to search for Leonhardt, but suddenly Leonhardt strikes it by surprise, making it bleed. Kyle Salterian mocks the Minotaur, telling it not to lose focus. Confidently, Kyle Salterian adds that his knight is very capable. The Minotaur gives a loud roar of pain as Leonhardt's sword strikes its shoulder, leaving a small cut. Kyle Salterian mocks the Minotaur, telling it not to get distracted, pointing out that his knight is very competent. The Minotaur bellows that this is unbelievable. It raises its hammer high, cursing Leonhardt and vowing to crush him. The Minotaur shouts that anyone aiming for its treasure will not leave alive, as it prepares to swing the hammer. Reacting quickly, Kyle Salterian uses a spell to summon a barrier above Leonhardt's head, blocking the hammer swung by the Minotaur. The Minotaur is shocked, seeing its full power attack blocked. Leonhardt struggles to hold onto his sword, overwhelmed by the Minotaur's strength. He admits that the Minotaur has tremendous power, and without Kyle's timely shield, his arm would have been broken. Leonhardt acknowledges that Kyle uses magic as if he already knows the next move, making the battle smooth. Not only that, but Leonhardt is confident Kyle Salterian is in complete control of the battle, with an innate sense of timing. Kyle Salterian shouts at Leonhardt to move and casts the ensnare spell on the Minotaur. The Minotaur realizes it can't move due to the spell. Kyle raises his hand, preparing another spell, using magic missile to shoot arrow-shaped lights at the Minotaur. The missiles bombard the Minotaur from behind, causing it to fall to its knees. Leonhardt, standing behind Kyle, asks if the Minotaur is defeated. Kyle remains silent as the Minotaur groans, stating that it's impressive humans pushed it this far. However, the Minotaur declares it is over and begins its ultimate move, spinning with its hammer. The Minotaur, spinning like a tornado, lunges toward Kyle and the others. Recognizing the whirlwind attack, Kyle immediately gets on guard, and he instructs Leonhardt to keep the aggro and lead the Minotaur to the outskirts, as planned. Urgel buffs Leonhardt as he sprints toward the Minotaur, agreeing with the plan. Leonhardt uses all his might and throws his sword at the Minotaur. The sword strikes the Minotaur's neck but bounces off. Seeing who attacked it, the Minotaur turns sideways and begins chasing Leonhardt, who runs away. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian and Urgel, safely hidden, watch Leonhardt in action. Kyle begins counting down from 30. Earlier, Kyle and Leonhardt had discussed this strategy, with Kyle explaining the Minotaur's ultimate attack. Kyle told Leonhardt that the Minotaur would become exhausted and vulnerable after this attack, and they should strike then. Kyle continues counting down, knowing that only 5 seconds remain. The countdown goes 5, 4, 3, while Leonhardt keeps running with the Minotaur chasing him. The Minotaur roars loudly with 2 seconds left. Leonhardt puts all his effort into running as the countdown reaches 1. The Minotaur finally ceases its ultimate attack and looks exhausted, stopping in its tracks. Right then, all the buffs on Leonhardt expire. As the Minotaur stops moving, Leonhardt notices the buffs expiring and wonders if Kyle timed this perfectly or what is a coincidence. With the Minotaur vulnerable, Kyle gets ready to counterattack, summoning numerous ice shards. Kyle notes that this is the key to unlocking ability limits, calling it true magic. Swinging his arm, Kyle makes the ice shards combine into a large ice lance that bombards the Minotaur. Finally defeated, the Minotaur vanishes into thin air. Urgel raises her hands toward the small cut on Leonhardt's hand, healing it instantly. Flexing his arm, Leonhardt thanks Urgel for healing him. Meanwhile, Kyle shouts excitedly, eager to see the treasure. He runs to the large chest, hugging it, and exclaims how beautiful it is. Wanting to see what's inside, Kyle uses insight to analyze the chest. One item is the Sword of the Rhino, an artifact made from rhino bones that increases the user's strength and durability, which Kyle thinks is perfect for Leonhardt. Another item is a jewels necklace, with blessings and spells for spiritists, which Kyle suggests Urgel use. Kyle continues searching the items, clearly looking for something specific, and moments later, he finds it. It is the Staff of Bravery, a powerful staff that allows faster magic casting and can store up to 3 spells without mana consumption. In fantasy defense, Kyle notes that getting this staff from the Minotaur dungeon is essential, as it can be used until higher magic circles are reached. Hugging the staff excitedly, Kyle remarks that he won't need to worry about weapons for a while Leonhardt examines his sword. Leonhardt agrees that the sword is indeed remarkable and understands why the Minotaur guarded such rare treasures. However, he feels unworthy of receiving such a valuable treasure. He recalls when Kyle Salterian had asked him whether his loyalty belonged to Kyle or his father, a question Leonhardt couldn't answer. Urgel expresses guilt, feeling like she only takes from Kyle without giving anything back. She claims that if she accepts these treasures, she won't be able to repay Kyle, but Kyle reassures her that she has already helped a lot. Leonhardt also expresses doubt, saying the sword is too valuable for him to use. Sighing at their concerns, Kyle tells them that giving them equipment is not just a reward. Kyle emphasizes that these items will make them stronger, and they don't have much time. He adds that becoming stronger is essential for their survival. Kyle acknowledges that receiving high-grade dungeon rewards usually actually means reporting them to the family, but he doesn't want to report these. He tells Leonhardt and Urgel that they are the only ones he trusts, and he wants them to take the items and grow stronger. Kyle claims that being strong is the only way to survive, especially with the impending darkness over the House of Selterian. Explaining this, Kyle asks Leonhardt and Urgel if they are ready to accept the items. Leonhardt and Urgel exchange a glance, then agree to take the items, thanking Kyle. With everything settled, Kyle suggests they head to Enphelum. A few days later at the granary region of Enphelum, someone's surprised voice booms out, asking what is going on. It's Count Frantel Neyron, the Lord of Enphelum, and he is in shock as he pulls on his suit hastily after having heard someone from the Selterian Marquis has shown up. In a hurried tone, he asks who came, and the informant says he isn't sure but saw the arrivals carrying a symbol that only direct descendants of Selterian can have. Frantel Neyron hopes whoever came won't drag his estate into whatever mess they are in, as he had heard the successor candidates are like a storm waiting to break. The informant points out that it's an unwritten rule not to involve other houses in a successor dispute, and Frantel Neyron groans that he doesn't want anything to do with this headache. He then heads to the door to welcome the guests, looking super nervous as he constantly adjusts his suit. Opening the door, he happily asks the guests what brings them there without notice, saying he would have gone out to greet them if he had known. He then stops as he sees Kyle Selterian already seated at the table and eating sweets. Smiling back, Kyle Selterian greets Frantel Neyron and says it's nice to meet him, apologizing for intruding without notice. Frantel Neyron doesn't respond, as if he's just received a major shock, and he apparently has no idea who Kyle Selterian is. After Kyle Selterian introduces himself, Frantel Neyron gets shocked, asking if it's the same Kyle Selterian, that infamous fourth son. Seeing Kyle Selterian get disrespected, Leonhardt gets pissed off, but Kyle Selterian assures him it's fine. Taking the cup of tea, Kyle Selterian admits that he was indeed a big troublemaker up until recently. He also reveals that he has overcome Hermamu and is a changed person now. Frantel Neyron is surprised to hear Kyle Selterian overcame Hermamu and asks if that's true, which Kyle Selterian confirms, also saying he's been training in magic. Kyle Selterian adds that he's now just trying to contribute to his family. Frantel Neyron had heard that Kyle Selterian was a huge troublemaker, but now seeing Kyle Selterian in person, it appears those rumors were fake, as Kyle Selterian's eyes aren't dull nor ill-mannered. Plus, Kyle Selterian now has a desire to help his family, so Frantel Neyron's opinion regarding Kyle Selterian changes right then, and he returns a smile. He notes that it's good that a first-ever wizard has appeared from the swordsmanship-renowned family, and expresses confidence that the Selterian Marquis family's future is bright. Saying so, Frantel Neyron suggests they now get down to business. He mentions that it's unlikely Kyle Selterian emerged there without prior notice just to say hello. With a smile, Kyle Selterian once again apologizes for coming unnoticed and then points out that the Marquis is in a delicate situation due to the succession issue. The reason he came there, as Kyle Selterian mentions, is to purchase grain, as Enphelum is the largest granary in the north. Hearing this, Frantel Neyron is surprised, noting that they already have a regular deal with the Selterians to trade grain, so Kyle Selterian's affirmation that he wants to buy more for magic research purposes raises questions. Kyle Selterian says that he can't reveal the nature of the research yet, but this won't be a one-time deal, and he plans to make regular purchases from now on. He explains that Enphelum has had a good harvest for the past few years, and since they have excess grain, Kyle Selterian wants to buy the excess stock that's been hard to manage. As for the budget, Leonhardt opens a small chest, revealing the coins for the purchase. Seeing the platinum coins, Frantel Neyron's jaws open wide in shock, and then he says there are no issues in selling the excess grain, as they might eventually go to waste, and also agrees to not question Kyle Selterian about what they will be used for. Smiling brightly, Kyle Selterian thanks Frantel Neyron for his understanding. However, Frantel Neyron says he does want to know how Kyle Selterian got this amount of coins. He raises concern that Kyle Selterian might have stolen them, but Kyle Selterian assures Frantel Neyron there's nothing to worry about. He reveals the truth that his elder brother is funding this, prompting Frantel Neyron to ask if it's Abel Selterian. Kyle Selterian confirms it's Abel Selterian, as he doesn't have any other elder brother to call to. Now assured the money is clean, Frantel Neyron says that's okay. Frantel Neyron is aware that Abel Selterian is calm and composed, so it's good to deal with him rather than the scheming second son, Adolf Selterian. With this deal, Frantel Neyron hopes he will be able to maintain a good relationship with Abel Selterian in the future too, and so he agrees to sell the grain to Kyle Selterian. Speaking about the price, Kyle Selterian says he will start with 4 silver per sack, while Frantel Neyron says he needs 7 silver per sack. Kyle Selterian points out that 7 silver for old grain is a bit too much, prompting prompting Frantel Neyron to say 6 silver, but Kyle Salterian reduces it to 4.5 silver. While those two are bargaining, Leonhardt remains silent and listens with interest. The discussion and bargaining go on for quite a while, such that morning turns to day to evening, and finally night. At the end, Kyle Salterian and Frantel Neyron both agree to settle at 5 silver per sack. A while later, Kyle Salterian goes to his room and lays down on his bed while Leonhardt, standing nearby, praises Kyle Salterian's bargaining skills. He asks if Kyle Salterian learned that from a book as well, and Kyle Salterian hurriedly affirms he did. But actually, Kyle Salterian had learned this skill while bargaining in online markets. Leonhardt then reminds Kyle Salterian he had said he came to impel him to make money and asks if buying grains is part of that plan. Leonhardt notes that their estate has already secured enough stock to last a year, so selling the old grain won't be profitable. However, Kyle Salterian, who knows what calamity is about to befall having played the game, says he's just preparing in advance if anything happens. Though no one knows, a massive famine is on its way. According to the game's storyline, after Salterian's succession ceremony, an unprecedented weather anomaly will cause a massive famine. This will cause the grain prices to skyrocket, and even with money, many people won't be able to buy food, during which time people won't care if the grain is old or new. So for this very reason, Kyle Salterian is preparing, and since he can't tell the truth to Leonhardt, he wonders how else he can make Leonhardt believe. But Leonhardt says he understands and notes that since everything Kyle Salterian does is for a reason, he will trust him and not question further. Hearing such wise words from Leonhardt, Kyle Salterian is startled as right then the favorability of Leonhardt for him increases to 50. Kyle Salterian is shocked seeing this much favorability as he remembers when he first met Leonhardt, the favorability was in the negative. Kyle Salterian's eyes widen and sparkle as he continues staring at Leonhardt, creeping him out. At that moment, Urgel peeks in through the door, calling out for Kyle Salterian. She informs Kyle Salterian that Frantel Neyron wants to discuss something with him before dinner. So Kyle Salterian leaves his room and goes to see Frantel Neyron asking if he's looking for him. Frantel Neyron affirms he wanted to see Kyle Salterian to introduce him to someone. Kyle Salterian wonders who could it be that Frantel Neyron wants to introduce him to. The girl who was already in the room greets Kyle Salterian and says she is the daughter of Frantel Neyron. Startled at first, Kyle Salterian turns around to see the girl greeting him. The girl introduces herself as Iris Neyron. Frantel Neyron introduces his daughter, Iris Neyron, to Kyle Salterian. Seeing Iris Neyron there, Kyle Salterian is really surprised. Iris Neyron greets Kyle Salterian, saying it's nice to meet him. She also introduces herself by name. Iris Neyron, thanks to her cute appearance and top 5% A-grade magic talent, has quite a fan base in fantasy defense, especially in the early stages. However, she has traits of arrogance, contempt for the weak, and demands anyone weaker must bow down to her. If anyone wants to meet her, they must bring her jewels, and she doesn't accept anything below diamonds. Her other traits include enjoying luxury, and beyond that, she has many personality issues. Due to her unique luxurious traits, there were often players who went bankrupt trying to raise her favorability. She was really a difficult character, and eventually, as power inflation took over in the later game, S-rank and SSS rank magicians became abundant. Iris Neyron, who was capped at A rank, became less useful and ended up as a discarded character by many players. Players found no point in recruiting her while enduring her difficult personality. Now seeing her in person, Kyle Salterian is really surprised. Frantel Neyron states that his daughter turned 11 years old this year, so he introduced her to Kyle Salterian, a 13-year-old, so they can get along. Frantel Neyron reveals that Iris Neyron is also studying magic. He adds that his daughter has exceptional magic talent, and since Kyle Salterian is also studying magic, maybe they can learn from each other. Hearing this, Kyle Salterian says he understands. However, seeing the look on Iris Neyron's face, Kyle Salterian thinks she might have different thoughts from Frantel Neyron. Kyle Salterian then tells Iris Neyron it's nice to meet her. Walking close to her, Kyle Salterian introduces himself. He tells her he looks forward to her guidance and right then activates insight. He learns that Iris Neyron, 11 years old, has 2 talents, and like in the game, she enjoys luxury. Apparently, her favorability towards Kyle Salterian is -40. Out of all, Kyle Salterian's attention goes to the companion of mana talent, which kind of startles him. Even though Kyle Salterian has never seen it before, in the original game, it's considered the #1 magical talent. It's a talent that only the top 0.1% of SSS grade magicians possess, and since Iris Neyron has it, Kyle Salterian wonders why she has it. He wonders if it might be that, like with Abel or Urgel, Iris Neyron has bloomed with new potential. In the game, people avoided Iris Neyron because of her personality traits, but since she now has the SSS grade talent, it changes everything, so Kyle Salterian decides not to let her slip away. Iris Neyron mockingly says she's heard a lot about Abel and Adolf, but has never heard of Kyle Salterian. She also adds that she heard Kyle Salterian is a first circle and mentions proudly that she's in the second circle. She asks how she and Kyle Salterian can handle this level gap between them. Kyle Salterian confirms he's indeed a first circle, but also adds that he's been learning magic for only 3 months. Now, Iris Neyron gets a little threatened hearing Kyle Salterian formed a circle only after 3 months of learning magic, which is twice as fast as she was. So she says that learning magic at 13 means Kyle Salterian is quite late. With a rude tone, she points out that it's common to start learning by the age of 10 at the latest if one wants to study magic. Doing his best to not show rudeness, Kyle Salterian politely agrees that he started learning a bit late. Then he reveals that he was suffering from Hermamu, so he had to overcome it. Looking surprised, Iris Neyron asks Kyle Salterian if he really overcame Hermamu. Feeling impressed, she starts to compliment him but quickly stops and acts rude again. Frantel Neyron asks Iris Neyron if she's heard about Hermamu before or not. He explains that to overcome it, one needs to be born with extraordinary magic or aura, which is why those who overcome Hermamu are often called genius magicians or knights. So, for Kyle Salterian to overcome that major illness at 13, Frantel Neyron notes that it's really amazing and that Kyle Salterian will grow even more from here. Frantel Neyron then says he hopes Iris Neyron can learn a lot from Kyle Salterian and receive good influences. Based on how arrogant she is, Iris Neyron protests that Kyle Salterian is still just a first circle, so how can she learn from him? Analyzing Iris Neyron's behavior, Kyle Salterian admits she does have a personality with lots of problems and decides to fix that habit and recruit her too. Making the first move, Kyle Salterian tells Iris Neyron she shouldn't judge people by their appearances. Taking a few steps forward, Kyle Salterian stands closer to Iris Neyron and says he will prove to her that he's not weaker than her. Seeing Kyle Salterian standing so close to her, Iris Neyron is taken aback. Angrily, she calls out to Kyle Salterian for being so confident, prompting Kyle Salterian to challenge her to a duel. Kyle Salterian promises to admit he's weaker than Iris Neyron if he loses. Without a thought, Iris Neyron accepts the challenge and confidently says if she wins, Kyle Salterian will kneel and lick her feet. Hearing such a condition set by his daughter, Frantel Neyron is bewildered. He calls her out, asking where she learned to say that, and Iris Neyron claims she read it in a book. With a suspicious tone, Frantel Neyron asks Iris Neyron if she has been reading one of those suspicious romance novels with age restrictions, but Iris Neyron denies it. Kyle Salterian accepts Iris Neyron's condition to lick her feet, her toes, or whatever she wants if he loses. Frantel Neyron is even more shocked as he asks Kyle Salterian what he is saying and tells him to not do this. Kyle Salterian sets another condition that if he wins, Iris Neyron will accept him as her teacher and she will never look down on weaker people, telling her to promise. Agreeing to Kyle Salterian's condition, Iris Neyron hums in approval. Pointing a finger at Kyle Salterian, Iris Neyron says a first circle who just started learning magic like him can never beat her. With this, she leaves the room and walks away. Frantel Neyron explains to Kyle Salterian that his daughter has some personality issues after being spoiled at a young age, and he fears if she grows like this, she will face problems in society. He also mentions that Iris Neyron has no friends of her own age right now, and her reputation among people isn't good. Frantel Neyron notes that since Kyle Salterian also had a similar childhood, he would at least understand Iris Neyron's psychological behavior. Thinking it will be a good lesson if Iris Neyron loses for once, Frantel Neyron tells Kyle Salterian to not hold back and go all out to defeat Iris Neyron. Now that he has Frantel Neyron's permission, Kyle Salterian decides to teach Iris Neyron a good lesson without holding back. Meanwhile, Iris Neyron is fuming as she walks along the corridor, feeling annoyed that a first circle is daring to try and teach her. She suddenly stops stops in her tracks, flashes of Kyle Salterian's face going by her eyes, and blushing a little. She admits he is kind of handsome, but still, she shouts out that Kyle Salterian is just a first circle. She vows that she will definitely make Kyle Salterian lick her foot as her favorability towards him goes up. Walking down the corridor after their meeting with Frantel Neyron, Leonhardt remarks that Frantel Neyron introducing Iris Neyron likely had another motive. He notes that, even though Iris Neyron is only 11, it's still an age suitable for discussing marriage proposals, and her age difference with Kyle Salterian is ideal. Hearing this, Kyle Salterian is completely shocked. The idea of a marriage proposal doesn't interest Kyle Salterian, and he dismisses Leonhardt's words as nonsense, but Leonhardt insists that nobles often marry earlier than commoners and get engaged in their early teens. Realizing it might be true that Frantel Neyron had marriage in his mind, Kyle Salterian falls into despair as Leonhardt tells him not to go too hard on Iris Neyron in their duel. Leonhardt suggests they should go easy on Iris Neyron since the future between her and Kyle Salterian is uncertain, but Kyle Salterian disagrees, saying if marriage is the intention, he must crush her even more thoroughly. Kyle Salterian insists that he can never marry Iris Neyron, given her attitude, even though she might have high status. Therefore, he makes up his mind to use all his strength to try to fix Iris Neyron's personality. While Leonhardt and Kyle Salterian were talking, Urgel has been listening quietly. She seems taken aback at the possibility of a marriage proposal between Kyle Salterian and Iris Neyron. The next day, it's time for the duel between Kyle Salterian and Iris Neyron. It will be a one-round match. In the duel, both opponents will be able to subdue each other with magic, but hurting each other is not allowed. If Leonhardt deems the duel dangerous, he will have the right to intervene. Explaining these rules, Leonhardt asks the contenders if they agree. Kyle Salterian states that his escort knight, Leonhardt, will be the referee and asks Iris Neyron if she has any objections. Looking confident, Iris Neyron replies that she has no objections, as she trusts Leonhardt's judgment. With this settled, Leonhardt raises his hand and signals both contenders to get ready. Iris Neyron raises her wand as Leonhardt declares the duel to start, and she instantly uses a spell. It's a fire arrow, which summons a small roaring torrent of fire that flies toward Kyle Salterian. Kyle Salterian acknowledges that Iris Neyron's incantation is indeed fast, but agrees she is still behind as he prepares a spell to counter. He uses the wind spell and shoots a whirl of wind toward the fire shot by Iris Neyron, blocking it. Seeing this, Iris Neyron is a little surprised and angry as she clenches her teeth. Raising her wand again, she dares Kyle Salterian not to underestimate her, noting she won't lose to some mere first circle magic. She then uses the fire arrow spell once again and fires a similar fire attack at Kyle Salterian. This time, Kyle Salterian summons a barrier around him to block the fire. With a smirk, he admits that Iris Neyron has got some guts and acknowledges that her magical power is impressive for her age. Deciding to test her, he prepares a spell, asking if she can block it. Then he shoots the magic missile straight at Iris Neyron. Seeing Kyle Salterian double cast, Frantel Neyron is shocked. The magic missile flying toward her reflects in Iris Neyron's eyes as she quickly summons a shield to block it. The magic missile strikes Iris Neyron's shield, releasing a powerful shockwave and pushing her backward. However, she does manage to block the attack. She counterattacks with the fire arrow, but Kyle Salterian summons wind that swallows it, and now looking desperate, Iris Neyron thinks she needs to cast another spell. But before she can act, she finds herself cornered, with Kyle Salterian's staff pointed right at her face, just inches away. She is done. She is defeated, and she can't do anything. Looking into Iris Neyron's eyes, Kyle Salterian points out that it's checkmate. Leonhardt, acting as the referee, declares that Kyle Salterian is the winner. Turning his back on Iris Neyron, Kyle Salterian begins smiling, while Iris Neyron, not content with defeat, looks angry. She is furious that she lost to a first circle despite being a second circle. As she clenches her fist, like a bitter child, she shouts that Kyle Salterian won by luck. She insists that she was just in a bad condition for a moment and demands a rematch. Kyle Salterian agrees to fight again, but assures her that the result won't be any different. However, Iris Neyron doesn't care. She intends to win this time. A few minutes later, Iris Neyron's wand drops to the ground, and she falls to her knees, huffing. Leonhardt announces that Kyle Salterian won the 5th round as well. well. Kyle Salterian tells Iris Neyron that no matter how many times she retries, the result will be the same. He suggests Iris Neyron give up, pointing out that she's probably out of magical power by now. Iris Neyron clenches her teeth in anger as tears leak down onto her hands placed on the floor. She is in disbelief that she lost and doesn't want to accept it, and in desperation, she begins to cry loudly. Seeing her cry, both Frantel Neyron and Kyle Salterian are startled as they try to calm her down. Kyle Salterian is confused as he doesn't know what to do now. However, he feels a bit bad, thinking he may have been too harsh on Iris Neyron. That night at Count Frantel Neyron's mansion, in one of the rooms, Kyle Salterian receives some new clothes sent by Frantel Neyron to wear for the banquet, which he doesn't want to. Leonhardt reminds Kyle Salterian that it's a formal occasion, so it's best to dress properly. While Kyle asks why he is being invited to the banquet, he points out that he just made Frantel Neyron's daughter cry a moment ago. Leonhardt replies that it's because Kyle Salterian decisively defeated Iris Neyron that Frantel Neyron seems even more determined to connect Kyle Salterian to his family. But Kyle notes that, on the other hand, Iris Neyron might hate him even more now. Leonhardt disagrees and says this might not be the case, as he saw the expression on Iris Neyron's face that said otherwise. Leaving the talks aside, Leonhardt suggests Kyle Salterian get ready and tells Urgel to help him. While Kyle Salterian gets dressed, Leonhardt looks at him and thinks that, though Kyle Salterian is knowledgeable about everything, he's surprisingly clueless when it comes to romance. After dressing up, Urgel fixes Kyle Salterian's hair and declares that it's done. Looking into the mirror, Kyle Salterian checks out his new look with the elegant dress. As Urgel tells him he looks great, Leonhardt also claims the dress suits Kyle Salterian perfectly. Now ready, Kyle Salterian suggests they go to the banquet. Arriving at the banquet, Kyle Salterian receives a positive welcome from everyone, all expecting to see him. Returning a smile, Kyle Salterian thanks them for inviting him. The eldest son, Myers, and second son, Lehman, of Frantel Neyron, both shake Kyle Salterian's hand and introduce themselves. Frantel Neyron looks around, not seeing Iris Neyron, and wonders why she is so late. Kyle Salterian listens as Frantel Neyron asks someone to find Iris Neyron, guilt gnawing at him for making her cry earlier, and fearing she might skip the banquet. However, at that moment, Iris Neyron, accompanied by a maid, walks in and tells her father she is there. With her hair well-groomed and wearing a nice dress, Iris Neyron looks stunning. She blushes slightly as her father compliments her, and her eyes fall on Kyle Salterian, who is staring at her. For a moment, the two of them continue to lock eyes, glaring at each other. Kyle Salterian had expected Iris Neyron wouldn't come, but it turns out he was wrong. Meanwhile, Iris Neyron, still staring at Kyle Salterian, admits to herself that he is indeed handsome, and he looks even better dressed up. Since everyone has arrived, Frantel Neyron announces that they will begin dining, telling Kyle Salterian to take a seat. Sitting in the chair next to Iris Neyron, Kyle Salterian isn't sure if he should, worried he might make her cry again. He activates Insight again, seeing Iris Neyron's traits unchanged, but her favorability towards him dropped to -10. Seeing this, Kyle Salterian is surprised, as he remembers that her favorability when they first met was -40, and he wonders why it changed. He thinks it might be because of her vanity trait and decides to prepare better next time. The meal proceeds with a more pleasant atmosphere than expected. Even Iris Neyron behaves calmly in front of her family without causing a fuss or acting arrogantly. Everything is going well when Kyle Salterian asks her older brother to pass the pepper. Seeing the pepper right in front of him, Kyle Salterian picks it up to pass it to Iris Neyron, but accidentally, his hand brushes against hers. Feeling Kyle Salterian's touch, Iris Neyron shouts in surprise, visibly shaken, as he explains he was just reaching for the nearby pepper. Both of them return to their meals, embarrassed and silent. Iris Neyron tells Kyle Salterian to just leave the pepper near her. Glancing sideways at Iris Neyron, Kyle Salterian notes that while her favorability has increased, her attitude somehow feels worse. The next day, Kyle Salterian is sitting down with Leonhardt and Urgel standing behind him, and he has a shocked expression on his face. Sitting directly in front of him on the other side of the table is Iris Neyron, as Kyle Salterian remarks that he didn't expect her to come to him. Iris Neyron remains silent for a moment before reminding Kyle Salterian of his promise to be her teacher. She asks him to teach her how he produces such powerful magic. She also points out that Kyle Salterian's magic is different from the typical casting method, which isn't in any books, and begins bombarding him with questions about it. Asking Iris Neyron to hold on, Kyle Salterian declares that if she wants to be his disciple, she needs to meet certain conditions. He adds that if Iris Neyron wants to learn magic from him, she will have to change her attitude. Iris Neyron asks what kind of attitude, and Kyle Salterian notes that the first is to be polite to others, not look down on the weak, and not be stubborn. Kyle Salterian also tells Iris Neyron that she must think 3 times before getting angry. Hearing these conditions, Iris Neyron does, in fact, look really angry. She shouts, saying Kyle Salterian is talking nonsense, claiming that not even her father has asked her to do such things. Iris Neyron refuses to do anything Kyle Salterian asks, but Kyle Salterian tries to tempt her, saying his magic is indeed cast using a unique method. He explains that it's a hybrid casting method that only he knows, so Iris Neyron won't be able to learn it anywhere else. Moreover, Kyle Salterian notes that learning such a method is an extraordinary opportunity, and a magic student like Iris Neyron should understand its significance. Kyle Salterian's plan seems to be working, as Iris Neyron still tries to argue but finds no valid points since she truly wants to learn the method. Finally, despite not liking it, Iris Neyron agrees to accept Kyle Salterian's conditions, as he reminds her that pretending to behave won't work. Kyle Salterian clarifies things by revealing that he has prepared something in advance, prompting Iris Neyron to ask what it is. Her face lights up as Kyle Salterian summons a glowing parchment, explaining that it's a magic contract. He points out that it's written in the parchment that Iris Neyron will accept his conditions and become his disciple. Summoning a quill, Kyle Salterian tells Iris Neyron to sign it, warning her that breaking the contract will result in punishment by divine power. Kyle Salterian also notes that the contract is so powerful that no magic can break it, warning Iris Neyron to be careful. Iris Neyron asks Kyle Salterian if she really has to sign the contract and questions if he doesn't trust her, which Kyle Salterian plainly admits he doesn't. Kyle Salterian also reveals that this magic contract was given to him by Iris Neyron's father. The previous day, after Kyle Salterian defeated Iris Neyron in the duels, Frantel Neyron had visited him and handed him this parchment, requesting him to teach his daughter. Frantel Neyron had also insisted that if Iris Neyron doesn't listen to Kyle Salterian, he should use the magic contract to make her follow the rules. Hearing that her own father doesn't trust her, Iris Neyron is bewildered and angry, accusing Kyle Salterian of lying, saying her father would never say that. Furious, she turns around and says she will go confront her father. Seeing Iris Neyron about to leave, Kyle Salterian remains silent for a moment before sighing and telling her to stop. He warns her that if she leaves now, their contract will be void. Not only that, Kyle Salterian makes it clear that if the contract is void, Iris Neyron will never see him again. Saying this, Kyle Salterian instructs Iris Neyron to sign the contract or leave the room and never see him again. Kyle Salterian tells Iris Neyron to make a decision now and sign the contract or else leave the room and never meet him again. Hearing Kyle Salterian say this, Iris Neyron is stunned, unsure of what to do. Smirking, Kyle Salterian stares at Iris Neyron, having decided not to tolerate her whining any further. Despite Iris Neyron's rare SSS class talent, if her character doesn't match, Kyle Salterian will have to give up. He needs reliable colleagues and subordinates, not a master he has to coddle and appease all the time. With trembling lips, Iris Neyron agrees to sign the contract. Kyle Salterian hands over the quill, and Iris Neyron grabs it. Slamming the contract on the table, Iris Neyron shouts angrily that she is signing it. Kyle Salterian looks at Iris Neyron and tells her to read the conditions carefully before signing. He points out that, on the contract, he is referred to as the first party and Iris Neyron as the second party. Going through the contract, Iris Neyron learns that the penalty for disobeying the contract is a slight stomachache. Kyle Salterian confirms the punishment, and Iris Neyron is relieved as she thought it would be harsher. Thinking it will be fine, Iris Neyron continues reading and discovers that Clause 7's strict penalty requires her to participate in combat, prompting Kyle Salterian to say that if she's scared, there's no point in learning stronger magic. Kyle Salterian asks Iris Neyron why she wants to learn magic in the first place. Iris Neyron doesn't answer immediately, then says she wants to be better than others. She claims she likes being praised and finds it thrilling to beat others and make them submit. She says she wants people to look up to her and admire her, which is the main reason she studies magic. However, she adds that lately, she's started enjoying magic itself and finds getting stronger fun. Lastly, she admits that even if she has to study magic all night, she doesn't mind. Hearing these remarks, Kyle Salterian is speechless but smiles, as this is what he wanted, desire for improvement. Kyle Salterian had wanted to confirm that Iris Neyron had what it takes, as the primary aptitude for becoming a magician is intellectual curiosity and thirst thirst for power. Without these traits, one cannot become stronger, as they make up the companion of mana skill. Iris Neyron continues and says she wants to be a combat magician and has wanted to get stronger ever since learning magic. Kyle Salterian watches happily as Iris Neyron finally signs the contract, which glows faintly and flies out of her hand, automatically sealing itself. The contract rolls up and flies toward Kyle Salterian's outstretched hand. Declaring the contract complete, Kyle Salterian extends his hand toward Iris Neyron and smiles, telling her he looks forward to working with her. He expresses hope that Iris Neyron will be his reliable companion in the future. Hearing the word companion, Iris Neyron gives a panicked look and screams, and she begins speaking gibberish, clearly embarrassed, and storms out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Seeing Iris Neyron's strange behavior, Kyle Salterian is puzzled, but Leonhardt seems to understand what's happening. Virgil, standing behind Kyle Salterian, turns to leave with a blank expression on her face. Later that evening, while in his room, Virgil asks Kyle Salterian if he is going to marry Iris Neyron, causing him to choke on his water in shock. Gasping for breath, Kyle Salterian asks Virgil what she is talking about, and he shouts that he's only 13 and it's not the right age to think about marriage. Fed up, Kyle Salterian wonders why everyone in this town is so eager to marry off kids early. Virgil asks if Kyle Salterian is really not thinking about marriage, which he affirms. Kyle Salterian claims he won't think about marriage until he's at least 18. Giving Kyle Salterian a long stare, Virgil acknowledges that he isn't thinking about it right now. She then informs Kyle Salterian that her mother is very beautiful. She claims that when she grows up, she will also be very beautiful. Saying so, Virgil wishes Kyle Salterian good night and leaves, leaving him open-jawed in shock. With a puzzled look, Kyle Salterian tries to figure out what just happened and admits that the kids here are really mature, even Virgil. Virgil had said she would be beautiful, and Kyle Salterian acknowledges she's already beautiful, so she'll be even more so when she grows up. Regarding Virgil's mother, Virgil originally came from the noble Helheim Baron family. After the family collapsed and their rank was downgraded, Virgil was sold into slavery. By then, her father and brothers were dead, and only her mother and younger sisters were alive, though no one knows where they are. Kyle Salterian wonders if Virgil might want to find her mother or feels too guilty to ask for help. Thinking for a moment, Kyle Salterian decides to look into this matter himself. A few days later, Kyle Salterian is ready to leave as he thanks Frantel Neyron for everything and waves goodbye from inside his carriage. Frantel Neyron and his 3 children have all come to see Kyle Salterian off. Sounding unhappy, Iris Neyron asks why Kyle Salterian is in such a hurry to go home and mutters that he could have stayed a few more days. Hearing this, Frantel Neyron says Iris Neyron seems fond of Kyle Salterian and assures her he'll be back soon. Looking angry, Iris Neyron shouts she doesn't like Kyle Salterian. Folding her arms stubbornly, Iris Neyron declares that the next time Kyle Salterian comes, she won't open the doors for him. Suddenly, she falls to her knees, feeling a sharp pain in her stomach as Frantel Neyron asks what's wrong. Iris Neyron says her stomach hurts, and Frantel Neyron points out this might be the penalty from the magic contract she signed. He tells Iris Neyron to think 3 times before getting angry next time and to hold back her anger, or her stomach will continue hurting. Clutching her stomach and with tears leaking from her eyes, Iris Neyron shouts angrily, cursing Kyle Salterian. Meanwhile, sitting happily inside the carriage on his way home, Kyle Salterian gets the feeling someone is swearing at him and knows who it might be. A few days later, Kyle Salterian returns home, and the moment he steps into the palace, Abel Salterian comes to see him. Walking with Kyle, Abel shares that Kyle's story inspired him to bring grain from Impellum as well. Kyle Salterian asks about the grain, and Abel admits it was just a few handfuls, leaving Kyle utterly bewildered. The amount Abel brought is 100 times less than what Kyle had managed to secure. Despite this, Abel assures Kyle that he won't hold him responsible even if they end up losing money. However, Kyle confidently responds that he isn't worried about losing money. Meanwhile, inside the palace, in the training hall, Remton Salterian is practicing sword fighting, his face drenched in sweat as he swings his blade. At that moment, Kyle arrives carrying a fresh and clean stack of towels. Remton asks Kyle how his trip to Impellum went, and Kyle replies that it was good and that the Count of Neyron treated him very well. Wiping his face, Remton smiles and asks Kyle if he's really teaching Iris magic. Mentioning the Count's letter, Kyle confirms he'll teach Iris and do his best, while Remton notes it will also be a valuable experience for Kyle. Kyle then asks asks Remton if the Count mentioned anything else in the letter. After thinking for a moment, Remton reveals that the Count talked about Kyle's engagement to Iris. Placing his sword back, Remton remarks that with Kyle's elder brothers unengaged, it wouldn't be right for Kyle to get engaged first. Relieved, Kyle says he has much to learn, wants to catch up on missed time, and asks Remton to handle the engagement for him. Remton calmly agrees to Kyle Saltarian's request. With his father's reassurance, Kyle breathes a sigh of relief, knowing he won't have to worry about engagements for now. Remton then calls out to Kyle Saltarian, telling him that he never intended to force him into a political marriage. Remton explains that although he and Kyle's mother never officially married, it wasn't because of her lower status. He shares that Kyle's mother didn't want to formalize their marriage, even when she became pregnant with Kyle. However, Remton had assured her that her status wouldn't matter and had agreed to marry her regardless. Remton recounts that he had even received approval from his retainers to proceed with the marriage. Yet, Kyle's mother, feeling guilty as the late Marchioness's maid, refused to marry out of respect for the late Marchioness. She explained it felt wrong to Abel and Adolphe Saltarian as they had just lost their mother, and that she didn't need a formal title with her child and Remton. She then placed a trusting hand on his, asking him to protect her and their children. Hugging her, Remton vowed to always love her and their children and to protect them from everything. Recounting this backstory to Kyle, Remton assures him that love sees no status and that whatever decision Kyle makes will have his support. Locking eyes with Kyle, Remton firmly repeats that he will support him in everything. Touched and slightly surprised by these words, Kyle wonders if Remton is feeling guilty or if he genuinely has fatherly feelings after all. After deeper thought, Kyle realizes that as the youngest child with no chance of succession, marrying the daughter of a powerful family could cause conflict, explaining Remton's words. Nevertheless, he tells Remton that he understands and admits that he is still young and cannot yet grasp all the complexities. Remton acknowledges that Kyle is an understanding child. With this, Kyle requests leave and turns to walk away, heading toward the library. Remton watches Kyle exit the training hall, thinking about how Kyle Saltarian still doesn't call him father. He then looks at the locket in his hand, which contains a picture of Aisha, and wonders if she resents him as well. As Kyle walks down the corridor, he recalls his recent conversation with his father, lost deep in thought. Suddenly, he remembers that he forgot to mention the spoils from the dungeon and stops, wondering what to do. He also recalls telling Leonhardt not to report to Remton, but as Leonhardt is loyal to Remton, Kyle isn't sure what Leonhardt will do. Regardless, Kyle decides to focus on his studies for now and handle this issue when the time comes. Lost in thought, Kyle suddenly collides with someone in the corridor. Groaning in pain and clutching his nose, Kyle hears the person apologizing to him. Looking up, Kyle recognizes the person as Remton's third son, Duke Saltarian. Noticing Duke's towering height, Kyle thinks that he might have grown a few inches since their last meeting. Kyle observes that despite being just 2 years younger than him, Duke has a much better physique. Not entirely pleased to see Kyle, Duke coldly asks why he is here. Duke reminds Kyle that Remton told him not to set foot in the main house. With an equally cold expression, Kyle replies that his confinement has been lifted due to his recent contributions. Leaning closer, Duke asks Kyle what he is plotting now. With a mocking smile, Duke sarcastically asks if Kyle's new scheme is pretending to act mature. At these comments, Kyle doesn't respond and simply continues to glare at Duke. Duke harbors deep hatred for his younger brother, Kyle Saltarian, despite Kyle being only 2 years younger than him. This resentment stems from his belief that their mother, Aisha, died prematurely due to the stress Kyle caused her. A flashback shows Duke weeping by Aisha's deathbed when Kyle, unaware, pushed open the door and walked in. The moment Kyle entered, Duke's eyes widened with loathing, and he angrily informed Kyle that their mother had passed away. Upon hearing the news, Kyle froze, as if struck by lightning, his face etched with pain as he stared at their mother's lifeless body on the bed. However, his expression twisted into an unsettling smile, and he remarked, surprised that their mother had died before him. Hearing Kyle's insensitive words, Duke lunged at him in fury, shouting as he shoved Kyle against the wall and grabbed him by the collar. Duke demanded how Kyle could speak so callously, especially since he had constantly worried their mother when she was alive. As though venting pent-up emotions, Duke accused Kyle of being selfish and careless, blaming him entirely for their mother's suffering. Duke went further, labeling Kyle as the murderer responsible for their mother's death, leaving Kyle speechless in response. Finally, Kyle shouted at Duke to release him and forcefully broke free from his grasp. Clenching his fists, Kyle bitterly declared that it wasn't his fault he had been born with a terminal illness. Raising his voice even more, Kyle screamed that it was their mother who had given birth to him, creating a sick and useless child like him. In a fit of rage, Duke punched Kyle across the face, knocking him to his knees. Glaring down at Kyle, Duke called him an animal and expressed how utterly fed up he was with him. Turning Turning to leave, Duke made his final remark, declaring that Kyle was no longer his brother. Left on the ground, Kyle began to cry, slamming his fist against the floor while cursing his misfortune. Returning to the present, Kyle is meeting Duke for the first time since their mother's death. Duke expresses disbelief that Kyle has changed, pointing at him and saying he knows Kyle's rotten nature better than anyone. Duke warns Kyle to leave the main house and never set foot inside it again. Standing firm, Kyle informs Duke that their father has already lifted his house arrest and granted him permission to enter the main house. Kyle then questions whether Duke considers himself to have more authority than their father. Hearing this, Duke's face turns red with anger, and he clenches his fist as though preparing to strike Kyle. However, just at that moment, Adolf arrives and intercepts Duke's punch before it can land. Kyle is startled by Adolf's sudden appearance. Even Duke looks shocked as Adolf calmly reminds him not to harm his younger brother, especially not within the main house. Adolf instructs Duke to apologize to Kyle, but Duke refuses, stating he can't do it. Instead, Duke excuses himself, turns on his heel, and walks away. Kyle and Adolf watch as Duke storms off, and Adolf, commenting on Duke's stubbornness, wonders aloud from whom he might have inherited it. Adolf asks if Kyle is hurt or upset, and Kyle admits his past mistakes make Duke's distrust natural. Placing a reassuring hand on Kyle's shoulder, Adolf tells him that he trusts him regardless. Kyle smiles and thanks Adolf for his trust. Adolf then mentions that he has been teaching Duke swordsmanship, but despite Duke's efforts, his skills remain average. Adolf tries to encourage Kyle, saying he is on a different level from Duke, having overcome Hermamu and become a wizard. Kyle is surprised to hear that Duke is learning swordsmanship from Adolf. Thanking Adolf for his kind words, Kyle excuses himself, saying he needs to head to the library. As they part ways, Kyle glances back at Adolf, puzzled about why Adolf is teaching Duke swordsmanship despite Duke's apparent lack of talent. Kyle reflects that Adolf doesn't seem like the kind of brother who would go out of his way to help his siblings. In the original fantasy game, Duke never survives the rebellion regardless of the route, and Kyle wonders if Adolf has been the one to eliminate Duke each time. Kyle realizes there might be secrets about Duke that even he isn't aware of. Meanwhile, Leonhardt returns to his village to spend the day off he receives after returning from Infellum. The day before, after arriving from Infellum, Leonhardt submitted a report to Remtun Selterian, who confirmed that Kyle had performed well there. Remtun asked Leonhardt if anything unusual has happened during the journey to or from Infellum. This question made Leonhardt uneasy, as he remembered Kyle has instructed him to keep the dungeon and its loot a secret for the time being. Choosing to follow Kyle's orders, Leonhardt lied and assured Remtun that nothing noteworthy occurred. Remtun then requested Leonhardt to continue looking after Kyle and protecting him. Back in the present, on his way home, Leonhardt spots his father, Leon, waving at him while holding two fishing rods. Later that day, they go fishing at a nearby lake, and while fishing, Leon asks how long Leonhardt will be staying. Leonhardt replies that he can only stay for half a day, which disappoints Leon, who points out it has been half a year since his last visit. Leonhardt promises to visit more often in the future. Leon then asks if the rumors about Kyle becoming more mature are true. Placing his sword beside him, Leonhardt confirms that Kyle has indeed become quite responsible. While waiting for a fish, Leonhardt reflects that he never expected to guard Kyle this long, as he had planned to return to the Seltean Knights. Looking at Leonhardt, Leon asks him what caused him to change his mind. Leonhardt responds that even he isn't sure why. He then recalls a flashback of one night when he, Kyle, and Urgel were on their way to Infellum and had set up a campfire to rest. During that moment, Kyle had commented on how weak Leonhardt's sword must have become by now, making it harder for him to go all out during fights. While the two were awake and talking, Urgel had fallen asleep nearby, stroking the fire with a stick. Kyle had remarked that it was time Leonhardt received a new sword, as he deserved it. Kyle had also expressed his regret for Leonhardt being stuck as his guard when he could be out there building a name for himself. When Leonhardt assured him it was all right, Kyle smiled and reminded him that as his knight, it meant a lot to him. Being called my knight by Kyle had deeply touched Leonhardt, as not even Remtun Selterian had ever spoken to him that way. Whenever Leonhardt is in the palace, he never feels he can fit among the royals, and he always maintains his position as a simple knight. Leon tells Leonhardt that he has always been the type to see things through once he sets his mind to something. He explains that it was the same when Leonhardt joined the order, even when he couldn't afford a proper swordsmanship teacher. Yet, he still took the entrance exam alone at 15 and was accepted into the order based on his skills alone. Leon tells Leonhardt that he probably already knows what he truly wants deep in his heart, but hasn't realized it yet. The two of them then fall silent and stare into the lake, holding their fishing rods. After After a few seconds, Leonhardt breaks the silence, saying that right now he feels Kyle needs him and someone he can trust. Hearing his son's words, Leon looks at him with a proud smile. Right then, the fishing line he is holding starts wriggling, signaling that a fish might have been caught. That night, Kyle visits Adolf and tells him that Abel came to recruit him, which shocks Adolf. In a startled tone, Adolf asks Kyle if he accepted Abel's offer, and Kyle, waving his hands, says he didn't. He points out that he was equally surprised when Abel suddenly approached him with the offer, as Abel rarely speaks to him. Thinking carefully, Adolf says that Abel must have approached Kyle with a hidden agenda. He notes that Abel is always like this, as he never bothers unless there's something in it for him. In a slightly higher voice, Adolf blurts out that when Kyle was sick, Abel never came to care for him. Adolf stares at Kyle and internally concludes that Abel must be trying to steal him away, declaring to himself that he won't allow it. With Baron Jerome's death, Adolf is determined not to lose any strength. Though Kyle is still a first circle mage, Adolf thinks it's better than nothing, especially since Kyle has shown great potential. Meanwhile, Kyle, trying to fool Adolf, reflects on Adolf's remark about Abel not caring for him when he was sick, noting the irony that Adolf never cared either. Abel's approach seems obvious, as it shows he values Kyle now, even though Kyle isn't any different. For his survival and to defeat the Dark Immortal, Kyle knows he needs the power of the Seltarian family, but before that, he is determined to crush Adolf's ambitions. Adolf claims he's been hearing that Abel is up to something and has been gathering grain. Acting as if he knows nothing, Kyle says he also bought some grain for magic research and wonders if Abel might be doing the same. However, Adolf says he doesn't know much about it either. He then offers a large magic book to Kyle and tells him to study hard and grow stronger so they can be of help to each other. Taking the book, Kyle smiles at Adolf and says he understands. Meanwhile, Urgel is standing outside the door, waiting for Kyle. At that moment, Kay arrives and calls out to Urgel. Kay shouts that she didn't become Adolf's spy willingly and claims that Adolf is holding her entire family hostage. Because of this, she says she had no choice but to follow Adolf's orders. Unmoved by her reasoning, Urgel tells Kay never to show her face in front of Kyle again. With an envious look, Kay tells Urgel that she's lucky to have no family holding her back. Saying so, Kay storms off. Seeing Urgel's sadness, Padaki makes soothing noises and tries to comfort her, showing she's not alone. Urgel assures Padaki that she is never alone, as she already has Kyle by her side. Padaki suggests Urgel ask Kyle about her family's whereabouts, but Urgel says that would be a difficult task. She points out that even she doesn't know if her family is still alive. Expressing gratitude to Kyle for saving her from being sold, she then swears with determination to become stronger for his sake. Kyle is standing at the center of the training hall, conjuring roaring flames of hot red fire that billow upward from his palms. Watching from the side, Urgel holds her breath, utterly impressed by the dazzling display of magic. Bellowing out the spell fire arrow, Kyle extends his hand forward and launches the roaring flame ball toward the target. The flaming ball hurtles forward with great force and strikes the target, shattering it into countless fragments. As the fiery explosion fades into the air, it leaves behind only a few pieces of debris from the obliterated target. Clenching his fist triumphantly, Kyle happily exclaims that he has finally mastered the fire arrow spell perfectly and has now achieved the second circle. Running toward Kyle with excitement, Urgel praises his hard work and asks if he'll take a break, but Kyle replies that he cannot rest yet. He reveals that his next plan is to travel to Prienus to recruit new talent for their cause. When Kyle shares this plan with Leonhardt, the latter looks displeased and immediately says that such a trip is impossible. Taken aback, Kyle questions why not, but Leonhardt firmly replies that Kyle can go anywhere except Prienus. Leonhardt adds that Kyle should already know the reasons behind this restriction. Kyle does know, as Prienus is infamous for its drinking, auctions, gambling, casinos, and other unsavory activities. The city of Prienus is renowned for endless entertainment and pleasure, making it practically forbidden for minors to visit. In a loud voice, Leonhardt reminds Kyle of the last time he went to Prienus, where he gambled at a casino and ended up losing all of his clothes. With an innocent look, Kyle promises that he isn't going to Prienus for fun this time, but only to visit the arena. Leonhardt shouts that the arena is even worse and declares that he will not allow Kyle to go to Prienus after he has finally started behaving responsibly. Although Kyle tries to argue and explain, Leonhardt cuts the conversation short and leaves the room, shutting the door behind him. Standing beside Kyle, Urgel mischievously suggests they should drug Leonhardt and sneak off to Prienus without his knowledge. Leaning back in his chair with a heavy sigh, Kyle feels unsure about what he should do next. Kyle knows this might be be his only chance to track Seren's movements and that missing it could be disastrous. Seren is the playable protagonist in fantasy defense, known for his decent stats and immense potential. As a default swordsman, Seren excels in his skill tree, but with proper training, his swordsmanship becomes nearly overpowered. Kyle hopes to recruit Seren in preparation for the looming battle against the Dark Immortal. Currently, Seren is in an underground arena located in the notorious city of Prienus. Inside the arena, 3 fighters stand ready with their weapons, awaiting their opponent, the undefeated champion known as the Sword Demon, Seren. Seeing Seren's smaller stature, a man in the crowd doubts how someone like him could be the legendary Sword Demon. Another man responds that despite Seren's skinny and weak appearance, he has reached this level with nothing but a sword. Seren steps into the arena, and upon spotting the 3 fighters, he dashes toward them at an astonishing speed. The 3 fighters attempt to flee in panic, but Seren quickly closes the distance and blocks their escape. With a chilling glare, Seren states that he will not let anyone get away from him. He swiftly cuts down the first fighter while the remaining 2 back up against the arena wall in fear. Seren asks the 2 remaining fighters who among them will challenge him next. Instead of fighting, the 2 men turn and scramble away like terrified rats, while Seren pursues them like a relentless predator. Their desperate attempts to escape are futile. Witnessing Seren's ruthless display, the crowd erupts in cheers, chanting his name with frenzied excitement. Seren stands in silence, absorbing the wild cheers and chants directed at him. Suddenly, Seren feels a strange sensation and stumbles slightly, groaning in visible pain. Dropping his sword, Seren collapses to the ground and loses consciousness as everything fades to black. Later, in a dark dungeon cell, Seren regains consciousness, gasping for air and struggling to reach the cell bars. 2 guards standing outside notice Seren's condition, but dismiss it, assuming he is merely exhausted and will recover on his own. They begin discussing how extraordinary it is that Seren, despite being so young, has such exceptional swordsmanship skills. Overhearing them, Seren listens as they mention his lack of parents, his abandonment, and how he is known only as the Sword Demon without a proper name. Meanwhile, back in the palace, Kyle tells Urgel that Seren is in the Prienus arena and is known as the Sword Demon. Kyle declares that if he can recruit Seren, he would be a powerful ally and vows to find a way to secure Seren's allegiance before it's too late. That evening, during dinner, Kyle and Urgel are seated on one side of the dining table facing Leonhardt, who sits on the opposite side. As Leonhardt takes a spoonful of soup, both Kyle and Urgel pause to observe him closely, as if anticipating something. When Leonhardt gulps down the soup, Kyle clenches his fist in a victorious gesture, giving Urgel a quick sideways glance. Busy enjoying his meal, Leonhardt notices their odd behavior and feels slightly puzzled. In the silence of midnight, Kyle and Urgel quietly creep out of their rooms, fully dressed for travel and carrying their packed belongings. They are confident that Leonhardt must be fast asleep at this hour, giving them the opportunity to leave unnoticed. Looking around cautiously, Kyle sees no one nearby and, looking pleased, notes that they only need to get past the corridor. As they tiptoe forward, Leonhardt's voice suddenly echoes from behind, asking them why they are sneaking out at such an hour. Startled by Leonhardt's unexpected presence, both Kyle and Urgel freeze in place. When Leonhardt demands an explanation, Kyle nervously looks away, clearly at a loss for words. Leonhardt accuses Kyle of drugging him with sleeping medicine in the soup and attempting to sneak out to Prienus without his consent. As Leonhardt begins to reprimand Urgel for assisting in this scheme, Kyle steps forward, taking full responsibility and defending Urgel. Kyle admits that he persuaded Urgel to go along with his plan and insists that she bears no blame for what happened. With a heavy sigh, Leonhardt warns Kyle that Prienus is currently dangerous, rife with robberies and other criminal activities. Leonhardt further emphasizes that while Kyle has the magic to protect himself, using it could cause significant casualties and attract unwanted attention. With a mischievous grin, Kyle boldly admits that he indeed plans to create a major commotion in Prienus. Kyle then reveals his true objective, which is to destroy the gladiator arena in Prienus and dismantle its operations entirely. He explains that his goal is to free the trapped gladiators and provide them with a chance at a better life beyond the arena. To accomplish this ambitious plan, Kyle declares that he will need Leonhardt's assistance to ensure its success. Kyle passionately asserts that he cannot stand by idly while children his age are forced to fight to the death for entertainment. Hearing Kyle's heartfelt reasoning, Leonhardt looks on the verge of tears, deeply moved by Kyle's determination. Urgel claps her hands joyfully, delighted by Kyle's noble intentions. A few days later, in one of Prienus City's casinos, a crowd gathers in amazement, captivated by Kyle's winning streak at the poker table. All eyes are on Kyle as he executes yet another royal straight flush, his skill leaving the audience in awe. Each successive round sees Kyle triumph with straight flushes and four-of-a-kind hands, his mountain of winnings growing growing steadily. Kyle smirks confidently, finding the game far too easy and the competition lacking any real challenge. A few days earlier, after persuading Leonhardt to accompany him to Prienus, Kyle reluctantly agreed to leave Urgel behind for safety reasons. Now, instead of heading directly to the underground gladiator arena, Kyle and Leonhardt spend time in the casino, stalling for the right moment to act. A rotund man named Riddle Remington, the son of Prienus's lord, claps his hands and praises Kyle's incredible luck at the game. Suggesting another round, Riddle asks if Kyle is willing to go all in for an even bigger bet. Tossing his cards onto the table, Kyle declares that he's bored with cards and wants to experience something far more thrilling. Kyle adds that he seeks excitement, something beyond mere gambling. Smirking, Riddle tells Kyle that he is just the kind of entertainment that will meet his expectations. Riddle then invites Kyle to follow him, and as Kyle rises from the table, he instructs Leonhardt to gather all their winnings. A casino official questions Riddle's decision to allow Kyle to take all the stakes, but Riddle confidently agrees, stating they will recover it soon enough. Grinning slyly, Riddle remarks that they will entertain Kyle first before stripping him of everything he has in the end. Having heard rumors of Kyle's newfound maturity, Riddle dismisses them as false, believing Kyle is still the same gullible fool. A day earlier, Riddle's father, Viscount Remington, informed him that Kyle was coming to Prienus, though the reason was unclear. Riddle assured his father that Kyle was likely here to gamble again, just as he had done in the past. Riddle confidently promised to ensure Kyle would lose everything and leave Prienus with nothing but humiliation. Back in the present, Riddle recalls this conversation with a sly smile, eager to impress his father by defeating Kyle utterly. Leading Kyle and Leonhardt to a secluded area, Riddle informs them that this place is not accessible to just anyone. Riddle asks Kyle if he understands, and Kyle acknowledges his loyalty. Riddle then promises that what Kyle is about to witness will undoubtedly satisfy his thirst for excitement. Smiling, Kyle remarks that he is genuinely looking forward to seeing whatever Riddle has to offer. However, deep down, Kyle is not just looking forward to the show. He is eagerly anticipating the complete destruction of everything Riddle holds dear, including the arena, and become a wizard. Kyle is surprised to hear that Duke is learning swordsmanship from Adolf. Thanking Adolf for his kind words, Kyle excuses himself, saying he needs to head to the library. As they part ways, Kyle glances back at Adolf, puzzled about why Adolf is teaching Duke swordsmanship despite Duke's apparent lack of talent. Kyle reflects that Adolf doesn't seem like the kind of brother who would go out of his way to help his siblings. In the original fantasy game, Duke never survives the rebellion regardless of the route, and Kyle wonders if Adolf has been the one to eliminate Duke each time. Kyle realizes there might be secrets about Duke that even he isn't aware of. Meanwhile, Leonhardt returns to his